What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the ASTROLABE. I am your host, Matt Erickson. And the show is brought to you by Kingpilled, sponsored by the Kingpilled Discord, kingpilled.com, the best paywalled community on the internet. We here believe in paywalling our best markets, and the Kingpilled Discord is full of the best people. You got to come join us, kingpilled.com. All right. I gotta try to keep a good pace going through this today because I got a whole bunch of stuff I got to go through, and I have a sort of hard out ish. My wife is getting a little bit of time alone, going to a local community meeting, like HOA meeting. That's her idea of getting a little break, a little bit of time alone. So my little sister's watching Eastwood right now, and I got to get down there and help out as soon as possible. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff to go through. I tried to put it in approximately sensible order, but it's a little hard because a lot of these different things all relate to one another. So this may not be as streamlined and ordered as I typically try to make these types of shows, but should be good anyways. And I will be joining Mr. Jason Miranchuk over on Jason's channel later this evening. He's going to be talking about Asmongold and AA, and should be a good one. Should be a spicy one. So I'll be jumping in there probably a little bit after he gets started. So come check us out there. Miranchuk Now is the channel. We were up into the wee hours of the morning last night in the voice chat in the Kingfield Discord discussing all sorts of different things, and it'll inform some of the stuff that I'll talk about today and some other things we'll discuss here in the future. But do me a favor and hit the like button, and make sure you share the show. I'm streaming it on YouTube and on X. At Real Kingpilled is where you can follow. And please do, if you have it in you, please do support the show. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can do it. There is the Kingpilled Discord. That's the best way you could support us. You can also, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link and a Cash App link in the description. You can be a paid subscriber on the Substack, or you can send a super chat. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it, but please do support the show. It is a labor of love putting it out here for free all the time. And it's very difficult. This is one of the things we were discussing last night. Jason and I were discussing how difficult it is to grow and maintain an audience on YouTube, and then to monetize it and grow it is virtually impossible. And then once you turn the ads off, I went and turned the labor of love. Very nice, Slutty Milk. That's good. A labor of love. I turned the ads off, so hopefully, let me know if you guys are still getting ads on the videos. I don't know what to do if that's the case, because I have literally said demonetize the video. Do not play ads on it. But I'm guessing that they're going to play ads on it. If they're not doing it now, they're going to do it in the near future. I'm guessing it's going to happen anyways. But once you turn ads off, then you could see a noticeable drop in the reach of the like organic impressions and stuff, because for as far as YouTube's concerned, videos are just a vehicle for applying ads. So if you're not going to allow any ads on your vehicle, they have no incentive to let that vehicle drive around. They keep us kind of in a little pen here. So we depend upon engagement with the channel, super chats, channel memberships. $5 a month, you can become a channel member, and then what's the other thing? So engagement, and then sharing the show. Just tell some people about it. It is also available as a podcast. It's on all the podcatchers. So if you're listening over there, do me a favor and leave a 5-star rating and review, so we can keep growing this shit. And also, EWBSX is live. You can follow the cyberbully on Twitter at EWBSX cyberbully, and then go to the app store of your choosing, whether you have an iPhone or an Android. We do have the EWBSX app live now, so go listen up. I've appreciated all the feedback from you guys. It seems like people are enjoying it, which is great. When you spend as much time as we spent building something up before launching it, it's very gratifying to hear that it is hitting the spot. So there'll be more things coming there as well. All right, let's get rocking and rolling. So for my I understand there's this the libs like to disparagingly call it the incel problem, but I would like to say it's just young men who are saving themselves, young men who are working on themselves, building up their capacity as a man, and waiting for the right one to show up. For those of you who are out there in the streets chasing down the Sheilas, Here is a little tip for you. This guy has got it figured out.
I said that you look absolutely fabulous. You're
you.
both wonderful. I just want to come over and say hey, let you know that you are both muy hermosa. Gorgioso. Yes, grandissimo even. But I don't want anything from you. I'm not going to ask you for your phone numbers. I'm not going to ask you for your online screen names. Nothing. I'm going to walk away and leave you alone. You'll never see me ever again.
Okay.
Yes. You don't even have to respond. This is where I leave. You'll never see me again. Goodbye.
Oh, wait, that was actually I like you.
Hey,
Sir, I'm sorry. Could we actually give you our phone number?
Absolutely not.
I believe that that was one of the techniques that the old red pill guys used to teach. Our lovely Jap friends, we love our Japs, don't we, folks? They're producing more Kino. They love them some Trump. Donald Trump. This is one I got to say. This is a captioned video. So if you don't speak Japanese, this is one that you will want to watch. I don't know if you'll get if you're watching the podcast, you want to go over to YouTube and go about 7 or so minutes into the stream, and you'll want to watch this one.
死んだ。初めて俺に伝えている。絶望の匂いだ。面白いこと見せようか。ほら、こんなにガチンが多すぎて。お父さん。あかん。ドナルド君はまだ死ぬ時じゃないでしょ。アメリカ、万歳。ファイト。絶対負けないよ。何度つらいとかで。ゼロ。だってまだサンキュー言ってないでしょ。一回も言ってください。おい、仲良くしてね。この世界、季節にいけるかな。昔グレートだったお気にまたグレートになるかな。あのさ、有名人なら誰かのマンコを掴んでいいさ。そうやらせるで。
Sheer Kino. Shout out to Sargon for sharing that one. And it was originally, I think it was created or was originally posted by Borrow from Tomorrow at BFT_Garrett. Borrow from Tomorrow. That's the first account that posted it. I don't know. Oh, wow. I didn't see this before. Pax Americana. Get wrecked. 1,000-year American Empire. R.A.P. Shinzo. See this? What'd you say? The Iceman? High art. I am a high art appreciator. And this right here is high art. What a good time to live in, man. Are you guys trusting? This is a space for trusters only. If you're not trusting, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're doing here. We are planned trusters of the highest order. Mr. President, we are your best guys. Shout out to Cringe Walker. CCP Nightmare Visions. Look at this. Battle Beagle says, if we were serious about Elon Bucks, I'd show a simulation of the dam destruction with Freebird playing in the background. Well, you put a wish out into the internet, and the wish is granted. I'm not going to say that phrase out loud because, yeah, that's not going to help the whole battling the algorithm thing. You better watch out, Ching Chongs. We'll have more about CHYNA here in just a few minutes. But I have to give. I saw the comment come through. I have to give a shout out to the lovely, the one and only Rhonda Bolin, my mother-in-law. She says, hello from Las Cruces, New Mexico. Joyfully listen to Mir and Chuck all 400 miles from Gila Bend, Arizona. Our sweet and lovely Gaga is driving out to spend some time with us. She's on her way. And this is what I've done to my sweet mother-in-law, is I have inflicted right-wing podcasts on her, right-wing racist podcasts. She just listens to me. She listens to Jason. Maybe even gotten her listening to Pete. I don't remember. But Gaga, it'll be good to see you when you get here. Okay, quick thing right here. There's so many things I had to drop out of the stack today because I wanted to keep this mostly focused. I've got limited time, so I wanted to keep this mostly focused on the whole stock market meltdown and the bond market turmoil. Remember who was telling you guys that there was going to be some sort of massive turmoil in the bond market? Who's been saying this for months now? Look out for it. Yeah, the stock market spasms are just a reflection of the turmoil that's bubbling up in the bond market that is going to have to be flushed out. But before we get to that, quick little story here. According to this fact sheet, President Trump has issued a memo, not yet published online, directing agencies to repeal regulations that are unlawful under 10 recent Supreme Court decisions. And there's just a couple of them here. The link is here to the whitehouse.gov fact sheet. You guys can go read all the details of it. But just these top 4 are rather significant. Implementing the law from recent Supreme Court decisions. President Trump's memorandum directs departments and agencies to review rules for legality under 10 recent watershed Supreme Court decisions. Number 1, Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo. This was the Chevron case. It overturned the Chevron doctrine. Accordingly, agencies are to repeal any regulation that is not consonant with the, quote, single best meaning of the statute authorizing it. Agencies are also to repeal any regulation that was promulgated in reliance on the Chevron doctrine, and that could be defended only by relying on Chevron deference. This is this was the real landmark case here, because what's happened is, the quick and dirty on this is Congress was basically writing really vague legislation and then just authorizing the executive agencies to interpret it and to effectively make the law. So the executive agencies were given a pretty wide berth to be the deciders and enforcers of the law. They were the experts, and so Congress would just grant them the experts they would say, this is approximately the goal that we're looking for, and you guys are the experts, so you figure out what needs to be done, and then they're granted the force of law, even though it's just an arbitrary dictate from some regulatory agency. So now he's saying, so the Chevron doctrine case was overturned, which meant all of that behavior is now strictly illegal. For a regulatory agency to come up with some sort of interpretation of the law and then begin applying it and enforcing it that way is now strictly illegal. It has to stop. But these are big bureaucratic institutions that just kind of run on inertia. So the fact that the Supreme Court said this is illegal, you can no longer do this, it doesn't matter until the executive begins to actually enforce that. They have to execute. And so here, Trump is saying now explicitly to every single one of these agencies, you have to repeal any regulation that you've produced that is not consonant with the single best meaning of the statute authorizing it. So there can't be some sort of vague, if the statute isn't written well, the statute has to be rewritten. Agencies are also to repeal any regulation that was promulgated in reliance on that. So if they were saying, okay, given the Chevron decision, we now are going to come up with these various different regulations. If any of those exist, they have to be repealed. This is now an explicit order from the president. Number 2, West Virginia via EPA was a landmark ruling applying the major questions doctrine, i.e. the principle that an agency cannot claim to discover vast delegations of power on an important issue in a statutory text that doesn't clearly provide such authority. In other words, agencies cannot seek to hide elephants in mouse holes. Accordingly, agencies must repeal any regulation promulgated in violation of the major questions doctrine. So related, it's related here. You can't say, "Oh, look at this! We found this vast delegation of power on this important issue," when that statutory text doesn't say we're giving you this vast power. Third one, SEC versus Jarkissi, held that it violates the 7th Amendment for agencies to adjudicate common law claims in their in-house courts. This has been another major issue. You have these big, these in-house courts for each of these agencies, EPA and SEC and all the different agencies, which it's like, if you have a dispute, if there's a dispute between you and the SEC, it's going to get settled in this court that is essentially owned and operated by the SEC. This is not this is a strict violation of the 7th Amendment. Agencies accordingly must repeal any regulation authorizing enforcement proceedings that enable the agency's courts to impose judgments or penalties that can only be obtained via jury trial in Article 3 courts. And then number 4 is Michigan v. EPA held that it violates the Administrative Procedure Act for an agency to promulgate regulations without properly considering the cost as well as the benefits. Agencies accordingly must repeal any regulation where the costs imposed are not justified by the public benefits or where such an analysis was never conducted to begin with. This is just the beginning. This is this was only 4. There's 10 of them, but I don't have time to go through and read all of them. But this is just the beginning of what's going to be an extremely long, drawn-out, teeth-pulling process. Having to extricate all of this bullshit from the agencies. And I just got to say, we're not even 100 days into the administration, and they are aggressively tackling so many different issues. Like, almost, I honestly can't really think of a major issue that they're not really aggressively tackling, or at least there's some issues that maybe they're not attacking head on, but they're attacking things that are that bolster those issues. So it's like a proxy attack on it. They're going after so much and accomplishing more than I could have hoped they would have accomplished in a year, much less 2 months. The speed at which the speed and comprehensiveness and the breadth and depth of this administration's I guess the way that they're pursuing their goals is like nothing I've ever seen. They could fall short of their ultimate goals right now, and we would still be so much further ahead than where we would have been otherwise. It's I think it's really easy to kind of get caught up in the day-to-day, especially if you're someone who's in this constant 24-minute news cycle. It's easy to start feeling like more time has passed than has actually passed. But when you're dealing with these sorts of massive, sprawling, bureaucratic, institutional inertia forces, some of these things are just simply going to take years to solve. And the only way to begin that process is to begin that process. You're not going to solve these problems immediately overnight. You have to get them underway. And I would have been pleased if they would have picked a couple of these and been like, all right, this other stuff is going to kind of have to resolve itself through other means. Congress is going to have to step up, or it's going to be resolved at the state level or whatever. And we're going to focus on these core issues. But they're just across the board hitting every single thing that they promised. And you've got a lot of retards out there who are like, I have no idea what's happening. They're so unclear. They're not giving us any guidance. We're having to try to read their minds. And they're literally straight up telling you, word for word, every single thing that they're going to do. We're going to have mass deportations. And now we have the Alien Enemies Act, which that was one of these stories here that the Supreme Court has approved them using this 1798 law to now mass deport Latin gangs into a supermax prison in Central America. Like, this is preposterous. We were just discussing this in the King Pill Discord, that there's people who are getting real antsy out there, and you don't have to. You don't have to. They are doing so much at one time. And many of these things simply take time. It's been 2 months, 2.5 months. Just be grateful for what's going on so far. That's not to say you can't, call for more. Obviously, we want more. We don't ever want to be satisfied. But there's a difference between calling for more and doom posting. And the doom posting does not do anything to accelerate the thing that you want. When you start doom posting, you're not actually motivating the result you think you are. All you're doing is demoralizing yourself and anybody who reads it. So doom posting is frankly extremely toxically feminine. Men, doom posting is very gay. It's gross. It's like It's like seeing a dude walking around in drag. You have that same reaction. Ugh. Brother, ugh. So no doom posting. All right, let me grab some of these super chats here real quick. Thank you for the super chats. Hermetic Gemini, $5. He says, evening. All right, so we have the Japanese on board. Now we just need the Germans. Throw in the Afrikaners for good measure. Watch out, everybody else. Yes. We always knew the Japanese were going to come on board. The Japanese love America too much. And the feeling's mutual. Oh, believe me, it's the feeling mutual among many Americans. Random username. What's up, buddy? Good to see you here. We got a couple of super chats with some of the guys who were in the King Pilled voice chat last night. He says, before SCOTUS is a case asking if Trump can fire employees of independent federal agencies. If they rule that they can, Powell is out. Well, I would say, thank you for the super chat. I would say Powell could theoretically be out. But I don't buy that there is much hostility between Trump and Powell, and especially between Trump and Powell, and especially between Bessent and Powell. If you listen to some of Bessent's interviews from before, last year, before he became the Treasury Secretary, and before it was even talked about that he was going to be the Treasury Secretary, you can he's very careful in how he talks about this stuff, but you can tell that when he critiques the Fed, he's not necessarily critiquing Jay Powell. And he is very clearly aware. I think you can see within his language that he was very clearly aware there was a disconnect between the prior administration and the Fed. And for lots of political reasons, he wouldn't want to talk to let on that maybe he's sort of sympathetic with Powell's perspective or something like that. Because you want to preserve the sort of independent thing. But I do believe the one of the outcomes of this administration is going to be drastically realigning the priorities of the Fed, basically bringing the Fed explicitly in as a no longer having this sort of quasi-independent thing, but making it much more strictly subservient to the Treasury, and then a number of things that would come with that, like perhaps getting more localized interest rates within the U.S. and having the Fed maintain a much more limited role. I do think that is part of the goal, and I don't think that Jay Powell is necessarily opposed to that notion. Okay, keeping this pressing here. This was a funny little story that happened yesterday. Town Hall tweets out, "Look who's in the Oval Office." Nicely highlighted here. Look at that. Look who looks extremely uncomfortable and out of place. And like she really wishes she wasn't there. It's Gretchen Whitmer. Gretchen Whitmer. And then Trump calls her out directly.
Has this gotten into any of the other lakes yet? Because you would think it would be pretty easy because they're all sort of connected. Governor?
It's why we're working so hard to make sure that, we work with the Army Corps and erect a barrier so that the Asian carp can't get into Lake Michigan. It'll devastate the ecosystem, the economy, tourism, and it's 20% of the world's fresh water is in the Great Lakes, Mr. President, which is why it's so important that as a nation we protect the pristine waters. Yep.
And, all of a sudden, I assume the lakes are all interconnected, right? So at some point they're going to be in the other lakes, and so we're going to work hard on that. I spoke with.
So at another point in the commentary here, he said, that she's been doing a very good job, and frankly, she's a very good person. She's a very kind person, something like that. And of course, I saw all the people who are wanting to call back to her right. No, wait a second, she's actually bad. No, Trump, don't you know she's so bad? She's very bad. She did so many bad things. How could you say she's good? I swear to God, you guys, tone down the autism. Recognize the nature of these sorts of relationships. By him publicly complimenting her and drawing her into his orbit, he is nuking her politically with the Democrats. He's forcing her into his orbit. You should have seen all of the libs. When I dipped my toe into lib Twitter yesterday, they were melting down about this. Oh, there we go. Just lost another presidential candidate. It's so funny how often the extremely autistic guys within our little segment of the world wind up melting down in the same way about the same things, just from like opposite perspectives. Their sentiment tracks with the libs' sentiment. When the libs are super demoralized about something, they're super demoralized about it too, just for their own reasons. This is very, very strange. This is owning the throne. Forcing your enemies into a humiliating position and being completely magnanimous and gracious to them, while recognizing that there's a great mutual recognition here, because look at this. She issued an official statement from her spokesperson. The governor was surprised that she was brought into the Oval Office during President Trump's press conference without any notice of the subject matter. Her presence is not an endorsement of the actions taken or statements made at that event. Now, one of the stories that they were talking about at that event, which is something I had to drop out and hopefully I can talk about tomorrow, is Trump revoking the security clearance for the former head of CISA, who has lots of sketchy connections to the 2020 election. He's the one who declared that it was the most secure election of all time. And so Trump is directly talking. He calls her into the Oval Office there while he's doing this press conference where he's signing executive orders, and he's talking about investigating voter fraud, and in speaking in very grave terms about the potential really dark things that happen and that they're uncovering and that sort of thing. And she has to stand there and listen to that. And then she has to go out and issue a statement because her people are losing their minds. And then, as if that wasn't good enough, today, according to Kofafi 2, Wales psychiatrist, less than 24 hours after he made her stand in the corner of the Oval Office while he signed an EO to investigate the cover-up of the 2020 steal. Masterful. She comes out and says this.
I understand the motivation behind the tariffs. And I can tell you, here's where President Trump and I do agree. We do need to make more stuff in America. More cars and chips. More steel and ships. We do need fair trade.
Nice little rhyme there, Miss Witchmer. This is capitulation. I told you guys right after the election that the only hope, the only hope that the Democrat Party has to try to maintain any sort of future is by becoming the MAGA light party. That's all they can do. All they can do is pivot in the MAGA direction, and their new platform has to be, we are the true MAGA party. Trump doesn't do MAGA right. We're the true MAGA party. Now, you got to get the autism out. You can't spurg out here and say, oh, I'm saying, oh, the Democrats are going to become good. No, I'm saying zoom out and take the meta perspective and recognize the change in territory that has happened. Now, the haven of the regime, these proxy Davos, this proxy Davos faction in the U.S. is now being forced to orbit around the priorities of the Trump administration. This is a complete change in the balance of power. Okay, so let's talk about some of this, of the tariffs and all the crazy turmoil that happened over the last couple of days. First of all, we now have a Gigaleaf. Now we had a Gigaleaf. I have to give this recognition. 109 viewers. Let's make it 110. Come on, 110, 110, 110, 110. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. Number go up. Number go up. Oh, we're just stuck at 109. Well, isn't that symbolic? We are stuck at 108. Oh no, go in the wrong direction. Let's stop looking at that. So we already have a Gigaleaf in the King Pill Discord. Our beloved C Kyle. C Kyle. That's C Kyle. I said C Kyle, YouTube. He is our Gigaleaf. However, we have a new candidate for Gigaleaf. Kevin O'Leary. Kevin O'Leary is I freaking love this guy. Listen to this.
104% tariffs in China are not enough. I'm advocating 400%. I do business in China. They don't play by the rules. They've been in the WTO for decades. They have never abided by any of the rules they agreed to when they came in for decades. They cheat, they steal IP. I can't litigate in their courts. They take product, technology, they steal it, they manufacture it and sell it back here. Never has an administration.
400% tariffs? What would that look like?
I want Xi on an airplane to Washington to level the playing field. This is not about tariffs anymore. Nobody has taken on China yet, not the Europeans, no administration for decades. As someone who actually does business there, I've had enough. I speak for millions of Americans who have IP that have been stolen by the Chinese. I have nothing against the Chinese people. They brought great literacy, art, and tech to the world. The government cheats and steals, and finally, an administration, you may not like Trump, you may not like his style or his rhetoric, finally, an administration that puts up and says enough. 400% tariffs tomorrow morning. He'll tell you why. Xi can only stay the supreme leader if people are employed. If we wipe out any business there, because we are still 39% of all consumables on Earth and 25% of the world's GDP, America is the #1 economy on Earth with all the cards. We will not have that forever. It's time to squeeze Chinese heads into the wall now.
Well,
I'm
hold
not
on a
talking about
second,
tariffs.
Kevin. Well, I hear you, but hold on. If we're talking about people, the average consumer, not necessarily the head honchos of businesses all across the globe, can they withstand the pressure of that sort of tax on the goods?
It's short-lived. There will be
but what's your timeline compared to, you don't know the average American's timeline, what they can actually survive. There's people right now who can't survive
400% tomorrow morning, Cheese on an airplane to Washington to cut a deal.
I love that we have an angry Canadian man going on TV and saying, squeeze the Chinese heads into the wall. I think O'Leary's a little bit of a lol cow, but he's fun about it. And he's much better than that queer Mark Cuban. Super chat here, $5 from Brent Taylor. He says, I moved into a rental, listed my house for sale on Tuesday, sold the house by Wednesday. Damn. The market is still hot, boy. Building a new place on property. Right on. Good to see you building. What market is that? Very curious to know where. I don't know if you don't want to, if it'd be too doxy, you don't have to say. But I'm very curious to know. Dak Jack says, this reminds me of that 4chan green text about a man who did business dealings in China. Well, maybe it was Kevin O'Leary. Maybe Kevin O'Leary is a Channer. Wouldn't that be great? That is California. Interesting. Very, very interesting. That story that he's describing, though, is Central Valley even. Wow. I would not have expected that. Interesting. So that story that O'Leary is telling is not it's not an uncommon one. Oh, just a sec. There was another super chat here I wanted to hit because it's perfect. Josh Ham says, liberals and Democrats' best hope is to become lolberts, preaching about government overreach and crying about hypocrisy. Yes, exactly. And given that, once you have that realization that that's the direction they're going to have to go, where essentially I think the Democrat Party is going to become the party of Maha. It's going to be like the sort of maybe some of the old school like Blue Dog Democrats with the bougie Instagram moms, the RFK loving moms, and the lolberts, and then some of the like National Review DeSantis types. Like that's going to be the new constituency of the Democrats. And so then what does it tell you when you hear a bunch of guys, as Jason Miranchuk said last year, he said after the election, suddenly a bunch of people who you thought were based are going to reveal themselves as not based at all. What does it tell you when they start sounding like lolberts? This should just reinforce this obvious thing that's happening. This whole tariffs thing I've seen so many people that I respect, very smart people who are, they have all the right opinions. And yet suddenly they're now like totally lolberting out about tariffs. oh, this is just a tax on your own people, and oh, you can't do tariffs. Like quoting Milton Friedman and stuff. This is like what you're seeing is a move to repopulate that new, I don't know, what's the space formerly occupied by the Democratic Party is going to now, the Democratic Party is going to move into this space that's populated by a bunch of lolberts who have developing Trump derangement syndrome. So Bowtied Broke here says, I've been selling on Amazon for 14 years. Built a huge business there. It helped fund my exit from corporate America, my re-entry to investment real estate, and my lifestyle. But an alarming thing occurred around 2019. I saw a lot more Chinese sellers popping up. And the crazy thing is, if you took even an hour to scroll through the seller forums Amazon had become rife with, or if you took even an hour to scroll through the seller forums, Amazon had become rife with trademark infringements being filed against U.S. sellers. But the caveat was many of the IP infringement takedowns were coming from a person outside of the U.S. Amazon would then take the claimant's word as gold, destroy the US-based seller's account, and all of a sudden, a Chinese-based seller would pop up on those listings. The US seller could not fight it, and Amazon would not listen. A long-standing seller making their living on Amazon shut down by a single copyright infringement claim. Then to watch multiple obvious Chinese selling accounts pop up in their place was not only common, but rampant. But the most insane thing was Amazon didn't care about the sellers in the US. They took fraudulent trademark claims as gold, destroying many third-party U.S. sellers in the process. The tariff impact on these Chinese sellers will be the chickens coming home to roost for Amazon, and it will be glorious for all of those who suffered as a result of Amazon putting a fraudster's word above a mom-and-pop third-party seller based in the U.S. One of the best things, there's so many stories like this I could have chosen, but one of the reasons I wanted to read this one is this, he identifies properly who the culprit is here, who the villain is. The villain is the American company. This whole thing wouldn't be a problem if American companies were incentivized to operate for the sake of the American people. But once you get sufficiently up into the corporate world, and then you get into all the globalized finance and the whole investment world, there has been no borders on that world. That's the land of the globalists. That's where that class, that I've even described it as like an ethnicity. It's like a transnational ethnicity of globalism. You get multiple generations now of people who think this way and operate this way, have these sorts of priors, and live in this sheltered. It's kind of an evolution on the European bourgeois class, but now it's become transnational. And you can be an American, you can have an American passport, but your first ethnicity is globalism. I think it's the best way to think about it. This is kind of a setup for as I kind of describe, as I understand it, what I see happening here. I don't think that this is a trade war between the U.S. and China. I think that this is the U.S. and China both trying to extricate themselves from this system that has them intertwined in a way that's leading them both to inevitable destruction. And so by engaging in this trade war between them, what they're actually doing is they're intentionally fracturing that I'm imagining like a super complicated network of twine and stuff all wound up and tangled up, and they're just right through the Gordian knot. Both countries have a strong incentive to destroy the old basis for their relationship and establish a new basis. And they have a common enemy, which is that globalist class. So I don't blame the Chinese people for trying to execute these sorts of, like, use the system for their own advantage. I'm sure from their perspective, they see this system as having been constructed to exploit them. So they're like, whatever, we're just going to exploit it back. And I think that mindset, when you look at it with that, I don't know, that lens, I think it makes all of this stuff make a lot more sense. There's actually very little chance that the U.S. and China are going to engage in hot war. And I have a number of things related to that. But like I said, I don't have everything perfectly in order today because I kind of have to hit these in. If I hit them in any order, they're going to kind of be out of order. So let's just go to the next tab. Great thread from, or great post from Vagrant. One of the libs, this is a few days ago. This is so great. This is so great when the libs just completely step in it like this. This guy, Chris Freeman, says, why stop at buying American? Why not buy exclusively from members of your immediate family? There's a tweet that Oren has done, a sign tapping tweet. I tried to find it and I couldn't find it. That it says something like occasionally the libs, they've managed to like reverse engineer traditional morality, and then they act like they've discovered the Holy Grail or something like that. Yeah, why not buy exclusively from members of your immediate family? So Vagrant says, this is a perfect encapsulation of liberal pathology. Say you need a blanket for your baby. You can get one from a Chinese undercut knockoff seller on Amazon, or your cousin who knits for a living with a small business. Your cousin loves making these, will make it with care and uses natural thread from a local supplier in their hometown. It'll last a lifetime. It'll support their business and their family, aka your family too. Normally they would charge 30, but they've offered to give you a family discount, asking only for 20. By contrast, the Chinese seller will use low-quality, scratchy polyester, which will fray after the second wash and cause your baby rashes. You'll have to buy another one in a few years. They lobby the government to ignore intellectual property laws and get tax breaks to scale their business, using your money to undercut other American businesses and pump the stock price of some soulless conglomerate that you've never heard of, whose CEO makes $50 gazillion a year. They used to charge $10, but because they've cornered the algorithm on Amazon, they now charge $15 for the same product due to inflation, so they can't claim, despite production costs being cheaper than ever. So yes, I would rather buy a product from someone I know and trust that will last longer and isn't poisonous, where I know my money will do some good and contribute to someone of my own kith and kin, instead of boosting the shareholder value of some faceless corporate entity based in China owned by global capital, which stole their product design from someone else and simply undercut the market by using lower quality materials while exploiting import and tax loopholes. Liberals would rather choose the worst quality foreign product. They literally feel more of a personal connection to a random Chinese corporation than to their own families, whom they deeply resent. And the heat map meme. And it's funny watching them all spaz out about this. And they're like, oh, I don't understand. You don't understand what it means. No. We understand. We understand. The fact that it's such a sore spot for them, they spaz out about it, is precisely why you know that it's hitting the spot. Okay, let me catch up on some of your comments here. I think I saw another super chat. I did. Column Rush. $10. He says, Trump has already won the blue collar, and if he continues to play his cards right, he'll win the dependent class as well. At that point, all the Dems would have are the champagne socialists. Indeed. Yes. They're just going to have the champagne socialists and the people who imagine themselves to be champagne socialists. Let's see some of the more comments here. Vorpal Anvil says, being kind of pedantic, but Amazon isn't really an American company now, is it? Exactly. Yes. Yeah. The multinational corporations have not been American companies. Even if they were founded, or even if they're headquartered or their base of operations is in America, their animating spirit is not American. And that's part of what whether they're intending to do it or not, that's part of what the Trump administration is beginning to ameliorate. They're establishing the market incentives to encourage these companies to begin acting like American companies again. Kingless Kingdom said, yes, the Jays are an ethnicity. See, that's the thing, is there are many Jays within that ethnicity, and that ethnicity is animated by a very Jay spirit. But just saying it's the Jays is oversimplified to the point of it actually becomes a detriment, because it means you're not seeing the world clearly. There's plenty of people who are ardent supporters and key actors within that transnational ethnicity who are not, have not been, and will not ever be Jays. But once you see the whole J thing, then it starts to that can be a way of beginning to see the bigger picture. Obligatory. Josh Ham says this is a financial war between sovereigns and banksters. Putin, Xi, and Trump are allied against globalists. Yes, I think that's a good headline summation of it. Colin Ross says China's already headed into a population crisis. They can't afford to lose the men to a war. Yes. Spudrocket says Amazon also destroyed businesses by undercutting prices of products from small sellers by copying product, undercutting price at a loss until they went under and then jacked the price up. So yes, Amazon has done this twice over. So they attained their market share by undercutting the small local sellers. And once they got there, and once the small local sellers began adapting to the new market structure, then they undercut them again. There's in another age, Amazon would have been seized and liquidated. And I do believe this is one of the things we were talking about in the voice chat last night, that it blows my mind that 3D printers are not far more proliferated than they are. I know one person who owns a 3D printer that I know of. But it's insane that we would ever have a problem of not enough domestic manufacturing in a world where 3D printers work. Frankly, there's no reason that the average family shouldn't have every house they buy comes with a 3D printer. And then they use that 3D printer to print all the tools, tchotchkes, silverware, even new parts for vehicles or for equipment, any of this stuff could all just be 3D printed. You could 3D print the houses. You could 3D print the cars. All of this stuff can be 3D printed. There is no reason why. Imagine a manufacturing state of being where every single house is a manufacturing hub. Imagine trying to engage in a land war in the United States when every single house is a manufacturing hub. And all the blueprints for everything get distributed on the internet. And you're like, all right, wartime economy now. Everyone's just going to start 3D printing rifles. Everyone's going to start 3D printing tanks. There is zero reason whatsoever that we shouldn't be able to effectively put Amazon out of business by just 3D printing stuff ourselves. But right now it's easier to just, you just pull your phone out and you order the thing and then wait for a little bit. It shows up. It wouldn't be that much different to run down to your 3D printer and give it the instructions and have it just print the thing that you need. If you need some little fastener, or if you need, your plate broke and you need a new plate or whatever, you shouldn't have to go out and buy this stuff. Just 3D print it. You guys are really flying in the chat today. I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep up with all of this. Oh, interesting. Politica Catholic says it looks like it's censoring my messages about CHYNA. Just sent 2 messages. They're not appearing. Very strange. Yeah, they're not showing up on YouTube or on Restream for me. Mr. Oblivion says there's already technology available to 3D print a house. I saved a couple of things for that. They've probably gotten buried now, but there's some pretty cool stuff out there as well. So far, 3D printers are kind of just like a hobbyist thing, but there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to develop entire little local manufacturing hubs around 3D printing. Okay, so he says, the point I was making was that Chinese emperor cannot win on trade against Orange Man, and he needs to make peace by unexisting men that manufacture Appalachian overdose substances. Okay, so the point I was making is that Xi cannot win on trade against Trump, and he needs to make peace by unexisting men that manufacture fentanyl. Yes. And he's got yeah, they're finally sent. And he's got a whole bunch of stuff. I haven't followed this super closely, but I've started trying to dig into it to understand this issue better. And he's been doing a whole purge of people within his own government, which just understanding the dynamics in the world at play right now, understanding how China came to be what China is, my intuition would say they are that he is doing the same thing in China within the Chinese context that Trump is trying to do in America, and is purging the same class of people. Anybody who's going to try to subvert Chinese sovereignty to suit the globalist world interest. I don't know this for sure, but it certainly stands to reason, and I've seen plenty of things indicating in that direction. Wit says, I have a CNC machine to carve lakes. Is that what that's supposed to say? Carve lakes in cutting boards. I can mill aluminum lowers on it. It was a 2K machine. Yeah, so yeah, $2,000, and that's a more expensive one. There's no reason every single house shouldn't have one of these. Okay, so Tom Luongo here says, this is geopolitics and a graphic. The entire Davos mindset. So this is on April 8th. Here's how countries have been responding to Donald Trump's tariffs. So you have the countries who are trying to negotiate. You have the countries who have offered concessions. You have the countries who have retaliated. You have the countries who may retaliate. And you have the ones who are not retaliating at all. So Mexico is just eating them. You have the EU, who announced that they were going to retaliate, but then they withdrew withdrew that when Trump announced his 90-day pause. And then I guess I assume people kind of already know the specific details of this, that everything went haywire. Trump rolled out this tariff regime. Everything started going haywire. And then China began escalating. And so they escalated right back. They got, it's up to, I think, 125% tariffs on China right now. And when Trump announced that, he basically said, okay, all these other countries have all come flying over to us. So please, please, please let us renegotiate. Let us negotiate something. So we're going to do a 90-day pause on everyone except for the people who are trying to retaliate against us. We warned them. We said, don't retaliate. You'll regret it if you retaliate. China retaliated and Canada retaliated, and everybody else came up to try to negotiate. This is madman negotiation that fits exactly every single negotiation process that Trump has ever undertaken. He literally wrote a book saying, this is how I negotiate. And people still think that when he gets what he's looking for, he just somehow barely managed to luck out. I can't believe. It's like he's gifted by the gods. Well, there may be some truth to that, but he literally said, this is what I'm going to do. I've made my entire career out of negotiating like this. I wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. And what has happened through the last few days is suddenly the whole world, who before was like, no, you can't just apply universal tariffs to everyone, is now like, please, please, just give us 10%. Just give us 10% and let us negotiate. Which is exactly where he wanted to be. And then the countries who didn't try to negotiate, the ones who retaliated, are getting pimp slapped. And this would be China and one of China's proxies. Now, again, I think that all of the stuff that is, I'm no like, what would be a Sinophile, but just kind of looking at this objectively, all the stuff that is portrayed as like Chinese hostility and spying and infiltration into America and stuff, I can totally understand why, from the Chinese perspective, to them, this is like national security. This is protecting our interests. They've been set up to be, there's been this intentional tension created between the US and China, and they've been intertwined and forced into this unholy marriage that is not good for either one of them. So it behooves both of them to ensure that they have leverage on each other. But this isn't a fundamental existential conflict outside of the context of the existing global order. Generally speaking, both US and China would be much better off engaging in mutually beneficial terms. But in order to do that, you have to completely reset the entire global monetary order, because it's premised upon America being a net importer of manufactured Chinese stuff and widening that gap ever more, which makes China more and more dependent upon America, and it makes America more and more dependent upon China, and it makes both of them worse off. So you might ask, who would have an incentive to create this sort of arrangement? It'd be a very strange thing for the U.S. to do to themselves. It'd be a very strange thing for China to do themselves. Gee, I wonder. Yeah, Politically Catholic says, I would totally do the same if I were in their shoes. Exactly. Which is why I think that that Trump can be as belligerent with them, because he is let me see if I can find this clip here. Oh, don't tell me that I didn't save it. Oh yeah, here we go. Right here. So let me pull this. Oh, come on. I wish this was easier to do. Right here. He has said things a lot like this many times, and he said it again. This is Trump talking about his relationship with Xi and what he expects going forward.
Are you concerned of escalation beyond the trade war with China?
No, I'm not concerned. I think President Xi is a very smart guy, and I think we'll end up making a very good deal for both. But, you know, we've been treated so badly for so many years. Again, we allowed that to happen. We've been treated so badly for so many years. But no, I don't expect that. I think President Xi is one of the very smart people of the world, and I don't think he'd allow that to happen. And we're very...
That's a lot of people I've seen, both when I've said this and people have said this in response to me, and I've seen other people with this commentary that oh, when he does this, this is just him, you know, like he said really nice things about Gretchen Whitmer, but he, you know, he's not trying to be, it's kind of same sort of idea here. But Trump doesn't, he reserves particular sorts of compliments only for particular people. When he is in a when he is having a negotiation out with someone where there's genuine hostility, he doesn't slather on the compliments in quite the same way. In this case, I think there's a lot of meaning behind him saying that that Xi is one of the very smart people in the world. He's very smart. We talk a lot. We're actually very good friends. You don't hear him talk about that that's how he talked about Abe. He's kind of talked about that with Kim Jong-un to some extent, but it's more measured. But when he talks about Xi, he says this over and over again. We talk more than you guys would think we do. We're very good friends. He's very, very intelligent. I know we're going to work things out. Some of this is just pacing. You know, he's building him up to give him the opportunity to fulfill that. But it's also, he wouldn't say it in the way he says it if it wasn't true.
Very powerful. This country is very powerful. Let me tell you, it's far more powerful than people understand. We have weaponry that nobody has any idea what it is, and it is the most powerful weapons in the world that we have.
The most powerful weapons in the world. We have weaponry that nobody knows what it is. That's a very interesting thing.
More powerful than anybody, not even close. So nobody's going to do that. But I think that if that's what you're referring to, maybe it's not. But just in terms of basic escalation, which is what you said, no, I think that President Xi is a man who knows exactly what has to be done. He's a very smart man. He loves his country. I know that for a fact. I know him very well. And I think he's going to want to get to a deal. I think that's going to happen. Yes.
Do you have to increase tariffs on China even more before they come to the table or give you a phone call?
I can't imagine it. No, I can't imagine it. I don't think so. I don't think I'll have to do it.
That's an interesting way to phrase it. I can't imagine. I can't imagine us possibly getting into a situation where I would have to increase the tariffs even more. Which means if he does have to increase the tariffs more, then it's one of those situations that he just couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine we would get to this point. So he manages to say like, yeah, no. Like, all right, we've gotten to this point. Now it's negotiation time. He's a smart man. He knows we're not backing down. He wants to do what's right for his country. If we don't back down and he doesn't back down, his country is going to collapse before ours does. We're the ones who hold all the chips here. So, which again, because America is the net importer versus China, that means the American market that China requires the American market, or suddenly they have to figure out someone else to go buy all of this stuff that they're producing, and then they get a glut of production, because they don't have any other market that is equivalent to the American market. And with all the just-in-time supply chains and everything else, China will buckle before the U.S. does. So he holds all the cards here. Trump holds all the cards.
I don't think we'll have to do it more. We calculated it very carefully. By the way, when you hear 100, a lot of people charge much more than that. Canada charges much more than that to our farmers, our dairy farmers. Many people charge much more than 100 or 125 in this case. But I don't, it's still a significant number. I don't see that.
Okay, so there's hold on, let me send this message real quick just to check on my sister and see how things are going down there. So this is a pretty good breakdown of all the the different perspectives out there. This is from Isabella Kaminska. She says, the internet today can be roughly divided into 1, Trump is a moron. All of this is shameful and disastrous exercise that will never hurt anyone. This is the usual never Trumpers or establishment voices. Number 2 is, if there was logic to the plan, they botched the comms, a la Liz Truss, and the 90-day pause is capitulation because of bond market fragility, the conservative moderates. And this is, a lot of people were like, oh, he capitulated. He capitulated. He got everybody to exactly the position he wanted them in. That's capitulation. Right. He had no idea that the bond market was so fragile. Oh, no, he has to stop. Right. Okay. Number 3, Trump's core ambition of balanced trade isn't wrong, but China has the upper hand, cautiously open-minded. And this one here, I can understand why people would think that, but they're just plain wrong. Number 4, China, or Xi, can do no wrong and is winning bigly. They owned Trump. Everything that's happened plays into China's hand. Western self-loathers. Anybody you see, this is a big revelatory moment. Anybody you see who's parroting these sorts of lines, they are, that's one of those, like, the tide went out and you realize their pants were down kind of moments. They're telling on themselves, as they say. Number 5, Trump is a genius and everything he does is 4D chess that most of us don't understand, but it's part of a bigger master plan. He just won bigly. MAGA. Well, yeah, that's exactly right. Our president. Then number 6, this is a power struggle, not between nation states, but between systems as the old regime fails. Open versus closed. Authoritarian versus free world. And it is continuously evolving in terms of the game theory. I think this authoritarian versus free world is kind of a gay framing, but I understand where it comes from. It's too early to say who is winning as the game is still in play, but not recognizing the wins and losses on either side is not going to help anyone understand anything. It certainly won't help you navigate the markets. For now, getting the key global players to Mar-a-Lago to discuss the new system was the key objective. On that front, the Trump team has won, largely by making it clear what's at stake and where the vulnerabilities are. Though maybe I am missing some other tribes, do let me know. Yes, this was the ultimate goal. Get everybody to Mar-a-Lago, bring everybody before the throne, and have them there saying, we don't like the current state of things, let's make something better. My guess is part of these negotiations are going to include inducing some of these nations into increasing their purchasing of U.S. treasuries. I think there's a number of interesting ways they'll wind up actually mechanically doing that. But part of this, I believe, is that everyone wants to frame the notion that, oh, China might start dumping treasuries, or all these other nations are dumping treasuries, or hedge funds are dumping treasuries. They say, oh, this is bad. This is bad. You know, he wants to get the 10-year yield down, but they're dumping treasuries and it's going up. And it seems pretty clear to me that the administration is more than happy to induce people into dumping treasuries because, yeah, it does hurt. It does make things worse in the short term, but there's a whole lot of really bad debt out there that's being held by hostiles. And they don't want this situation where you have, like, it's bad enough to have a bunch of bad debt out there, and then to have that bad debt in the hands of being controlled by hostile nations makes things even worse. So they actually have an incentive to encourage those treasury sell-offs. They need a plan to come in behind it. But at this point, it should be very obvious that they have a plan, that this is something that's being done consciously and intentionally and in like strict coordination. And we've got lots of little hints about some of the things that that they're pivoting toward. But Scott Bessent said last year, he said, there's going to be a Bretton Woods 2.0, and I want to be a part of that. That's a direct quote. He said, within the next 3 or 4 years, there's going to be a Bretton Woods 2.0, and I want to be a part of that. What that means is there is going to be a fundamental reordering of the global monetary system. So things are not going to stay the way they are anymore. And when you're dealing with something as absolutely incomprehensibly massive as the global monetary system, with all the super complicated networks of derivatives and carry trades and all these different networked financialization schemes, the only way that you're going to get massive moves with that is by scaring the shit out of them. You have to upset the apple cart. You have to make people desperate because there's so much institutional inertia trying to maintain the way things are. But the administration has been entirely clear that their goal is to change the way things are and establish a new, completely new baseline to define a new era of history. So in order to do that, they can't just ask people, hey, would you please consider maybe changing? They have to wield the big stick. They have to get chaotic. They have to get crazy. They have to get unpredictable. So all the volatility and all the uncertainty that everyone is pointing to is, oh no, Trump and Bessent are fucking up. They're intentionally creating uncertainty and volatility because that's the only way that they're going to be able to move things. So a lot of you guys may have heard about this so-called basis trade. And it seems as if this was one of the big narratives that everybody latched onto as to what was happening. And I think it is. This was a major thing that was happening, but I don't think most people understand exactly why this was happening. And I have a bit of my own theory that's been informed by some others. It seems most viable to me. So first of all, let's get some details on this. There's a great article from Zero Hedge I'm going to read through. So this is called Absolutely Spectacular Meltdown. The basis trade is blowing up, sparking multi-trillion liquidation panic. We first had a sense that something was off 2 weeks ago when we read that the Fed was preparing to bail out basis traders, i.e. the largest multi-strategy hedge funds in the world, including Millennium, Citadel, Point72, Balyasny, Exodus Point, due to their staggering exposure to basis trade. C, Fed urged to bail out hedge funds during next market crash, trillions in basis trades at risk. Now, Zero Hedge is generally pretty decent, but we read that the Fed was preparing to bail out, and then the headline is Fed urged to bail out. So those are very different things. Dreading what comes next, we next looked at the regulatory leverage among these usual suspects, whom we had been profiling ever since September 2019, when the first big basis trade blowup took place, to be followed just a few months later in March 2020 by the biggest basis trade collapse yet, and which led to a multi-trillion-dollar Fed bailout of the entire financial system. And to our horror, discovered what we had suspected. Regulatory leverage among basis traders had almost doubled since the last time the Fed was forced to inject trillions to bail out the world's largest hedge funds under the guise of rebooting the U.S. economy in the aftermath of the COVID lockdowns. A tweet from them, December of 2023, why the nonstop regulatory freakout about the basis trade? The answer is in 2 charts. Continuing the piece here, it says, leaving the Millennium, Citadels, and Balsianis of the world levered up almost as much as LTCM at the time it blew up. And another tweet from March of 2025, Zero Hedge said the last time the Fed bailed out hedge fund basis trades was September 2019 and March 2020. Since then, regulatory assets among the big multi-strat funds have nearly 3x'd. And they're eagerly collecting pennies ahead of what would inevitably be the biggest steamroller of all time. So this is hedge fund regulatory assets, 2023 and 2024. This is their assets under management, all these different options and futures and all the different financialized trades and stuff that they have that constitute their assets under management. This is the from 2023 in the blue and then 2024 in the red. All of that extra liquidity that was being printed and just funneled into the market by the Biden administration, a ton of it was going into this sort of thing. And then here's the regulatory leverage. They've gone from 6.6x to 7.5x. That's Millennium. Citadel's gone from 5.4 to 7.2. Balyasny's gone from 9.5 to 11.6, and so on. Says, and just in case this message flies over someone's head, none other than the Treasury Borrowing Advisory Committee, or TBAC, wrote in January of 2024 that, quote, anecdotally, 20x appears to be a good approximation of leverage typically used in these trades. There's a screenshot here of the breakdown of that. Translation, a 5% loss and total loss. In retrospect, then, it was no wonder that the Fed has been quietly preparing at least one bailout vehicle for when the proverbial match lit up, which may be the biggest hedge fund conflagration in history. As former Fed Governor Jeremy Steen wrote, to relieve the stress on dealers, it would be sufficient for the Fed to take the other side of this unwind, purchasing Treasury securities and fully hedging this purchase with an offsetting sale of futures. End quote. Yes, they were openly discussing institutionalizing moral hazard among the world's billionaires, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. So devastating would be the consequences of letting the basis trade collapse, the Fed had no other choice. In any case, as we noticed some peculiar development in the bond and funding markets, which we couldn't quite explain yet, we said that, quote, it sure would be ironic if the basis trade blew up this week. At a record, I do not know what this term means, 600 DV01, market-wide, the Fed's hedge fund bailout facility would need to be about 1.8 to 1.9 trillion, give or take a few hundred billions. Ironic indeed, because fast forwarding to today, just 3 days later, we find that we are just hours away from discovering just how willing the Fed is to bail out said hedge funds, because we may have finally encountered the proverbial match. But first, we urge readers to reread our article from October 2024, when for the first time we looked at a rather opaque and otherwise boring corner of the financial plumbing universe, Treasury swap spreads. The article was aptly named, What is Going On with Swap Spreads? Goldman Warns All Hell About to Break Loose in Repo. And basically, what the basis trade is these massive hedge funds are creating they will short cash treasuries and long treasury futures. So the cash treasuries they short, the futures they long, and then they arbitrage the difference between them. So the treasuries will have one interest rate, the futures will have another one, and they collect the spread, which is it's pennies. But it's historically, because treasuries tend to be pretty stable, it's historically been a very profitable trade, and so they've levered these up 20x, 50x, even 100x. They go and they borrow money to put into this trade, which means if you suddenly get a whole bunch of volatility in the treasury market, they effectively get margin called on that leverage. So they have to come in and bring extra collateral to bear. So what this is doing then is it's forcing a massive sell-off in treasuries. And as the treasuries sell off, the yield spikes. And the narrative in the markets has been, oh, this is China selling off treasuries to get dollars, to strengthen dollars, to weaken the yuan, to try to protect the spread that they have in the trades. But Tom Luongo's market report from yesterday is very good, because he goes through the financial plumbing in detail and shows how there is no evidence that China was selling off treasuries like that. But there's a lot of evidence that it was happening in Europe. And all of these hedge funds were doing this as well. Back to the article. It says, luckily all hell did not break loose back in October, as swap spreads eventually halted their sharp move, thanks to a still unexplained source of liquidity emerging in the last minute. Although with said calamity expected to occur just days before the election, which Kamala Harris was supposed to win, we can kind of imagine where the stealth funding came from. This time, however, we are not so lucky. Presenting Exhibit A, 3-year SOFR swap spreads, which are currently in unprecedented free fall and about to recreate the catastrophic scenario that Goldman warned about back in October. What's going on here? Well, the simple explanation is that the most popular trade among the hedge fund community, the aforementioned basis pair trade of long treasuries, short swaps, is in the process of terminal catastrophic unwind. Here, some blame Trump for unleashing the stagflation genie with his trade war. Others accuse China of dumping treasuries in response. Yet others say it's just long overdue that the basis trade finally blew up. And as a result of the panicked scramble to unwind, swaps are now massively outperforming treasuries, which are getting dumped, and pushing swap rates far below treasury yields, resulting in record negative swap spread rates. The bottom line is that funds and banks are panic selling treasuries to raise cash, while adding swaps to maintain exposure to interest rates, leading to the record low spread between swap rates and treasury yields across the curve. Yes, we have shown the 3-year SOFR swap spread chart above, but one can look at every tenor across the curve and get the same message. Here's the swap spread curve out across all the yields. This is the 2-year out to the 50-year. The Financial Times, which picked up on the topic of the collapsing basis trade topic about 10 days after us, quoted a hedge fund manager who said that, quote, hedge funds have been liquidating U.S. Treasury basis trades furiously, end quote. The furious panic to unwind the basis trade means the paper leg of the trade has been pushing yields soaring, something which can be seen by observing the unprecedented 50 bips move higher in the 10-year yields in just the past 2 days, a move which may have easily gotten some additional kick from Chinese selling of U.S. paper too. But once again, I don't think that there was much Chinese selling of U.S. paper. I think there was a lot of it happening out of the EU. The moves were not limited to hedge funds. Investors across the board have sold treasuries to raise cash, with one fixed income traders pointing specifically to traditional asset managers. Quote, I think investors are moving to cash and cash-adjacent assets to weather this market volatility, said Ed Al-Husseini, senior rates analyst at Columbia Threadneedle Investments. The simple explanation for the move in yields is investors selling what they can and hunkering down. Selling equities now will lock in losses, so the lowest hanging fruit is to raise cash by selling treasuries. The hedge fund manager who attributed the moves in yields to the basis trade said the scale of the broader hedge fund selling was, quote, destroying liquidity, or the ability to easily buy and sell assets across treasuries, high-grade corporate bonds, and mortgage-backed securities. And certainly stocks, as we noted earlier, according to the Goldman head trader John Flood, the M&E top of book has just dropped to a record low 1.39 million, even as stock trading volumes hit all-time highs, resulting in insane roller coaster days like today and yesterday. So basically what's happened here is that all of these investors, the big hedge funds and everyone else who are playing these arbitrage games in the spread between the treasuries and the futures, they're being forced into cash. So all the administration intentionally created this scenario. This wasn't an accident. They're intentionally creating this scenario with the timing of the tariff regime coming, it being announced on April 2 and being announced way more aggressively than anybody expected. They're totally playing hardball with everyone. And on March 31 was when the last synthetic LIBOR contract ended. So SOFR is fully the law of the land as of April 1, and then April 2, they go bam. They intentionally created this because they're trying to force people into cash. They're trying to clear out a bunch of these leveraged trades for whatever is coming next. There's massive deleveraging going on. Any source of liquidity is being tapped. And all of this leveraging that happened is because of all of the money printing that has happened over the last 5 years. All of that extra money, this is all fake money that's just going to Wall Street. I've got a quote from Scott Besson about this here in a little bit. It says, that was actually one of the more cheerful takes. From a far more dire perspective on what is happening, we bring to your attention an absolute must-read note published this evening by Nomura rates trader Ryan Plants, available here to pro subscribers, which our friend Charlie McElligott summarizes as follows, quote, our pets' heads are falling off in treasury space, where it's just unwind city into this bear steepening shock, with swap spreads and basis trades melting. Look at the one-day ASW. Yeah, some of this is lingo that's just over my head. Cash bond calamity and cheapening violently to the swap. Something that Ryan calls one of the largest, if not the largest, that I remember in my career. It's simply a vacuum of liquidity at this point. Yeah, Phil Gibson says they're making don't use over leverage cool again. We excerpt one must-read note below, which we are delighted to note comes from the same conclusion as what we said earlier in the day. The Fed now has to step in. See, this is the narrative. No, the Fed has to come in. The Fed has to save us. Save us, Jay, please. Interestingly, the Fed's not coming in, and the administration's not saying, hey, because they created this intentionally. And even though Powell may hate to appear like he's bailing out Trump's trade war, he simply has no choice. Quoting from this piece, the Trump administration meant it when they said quiet mode. They are letting the pain really flow. The fear induced from a true buyer strike driven by the administration's aggressive stance on our trade partners has left a void in the U.S. Treasuries market. absolutely spectacular meltdown into the end of the session, which has many, myself included, continuing to question their sanity as the curve aggressively bear steepens and spreads, basis, etc., fall out of the bed. The ASW change on day one is truly remarkable. This is a one-day change, mind you, which is one of the largest, if not the largest, that I remember in my career. It's simply a vacuum of liquidity at this point. The dialogue has quickly become, when will the Fed come to the rescue? Question deluge. We flagged earlier this morning, until we see material liquidity change, funding stress via higher repo, massive funding raised from banks via FHLB like we saw during the bank crisis a few years ago, etc., then this is really all about sentiment and comfort. Then and only then is an emergency cut on the table. Well, we are certainly feeling like this could be the next shoe to drop. Recall, 2020 QE was about liquidity and market function, and surely another gap move like we saw today could leave us in a place where tapping the SRF, ending QT, etc., is quickly on the table. I even uttered the words Operation Twist today. That's where we are. That said, we still aren't there yet in funding markets. And then Fred Nugent, head of repo sales, to comment on this below. Quote, the world is awash in uncertainty amidst the meltdown in asset classes across the globe. The price action in the yield curve and the unwinding of popular RV trades, basis and swap spreads, etc., has many wondering if the next shoe to drop will be funding rates. Throw in potential reserve manager selling, adding to already bloated dealer sheets, and it's not hard to see why some are wondering if we're looking at another March 2020 type event. Note well, I do not think we are there. This is not the same. Funding markets remain remarkably functional. Isn't that interesting? The funding markets are staying functional. Levels are likely to remain at or near upper bound in the near term, but that's not far off from where my base case was before the past 2 days price action. Cash available in the growth and sponsored repo mean we are in a much better spot now than then. That said, many are concerned, and any disruption or even the perception of it in funding rates would be gasoline to this fire. And there's significant event risk in the coming week with mid-month coupon settlements and tax day flows. Tax day sees large amounts of cash moving through the system. And while balance sheet will not be a binding constraint here, there can be large frictions associated with these cash movements, especially with the RRP low. When I look at the auction results in the 3-year today and the large dealer take, I see additional potential sources of stress. Let's see how the rest of the coupon supply shakes out. Fortunately, the Fed has tools in place to address any potential liquidity concerns over the tax day period. A lot can change in a week, but why not position the SRF for additional morning operations similar to this past quarter end? These can be announced immediately and remain through the long weekend and would not have the balance sheet constraints we would see in typical month quarter end. Well, I don't think we're at risk of it meaningfully being used. Why not make it available in an effort to calm the broader markets and perhaps stabilize spreads? Because right now, they don't want the broader markets to be calm. Because when the broader markets get calm, they're going to try to go back to business as usual. And business as usual is done. In spite of it not being used, we've seen the availability of the morning operations which satisfy overdraft concerns have stabilizing effects in the very recent past. No reason to expect different now. Good luck, everyone. So to summarize, multi-trillion basis trade is blowing up and countless funds and banks are unwinding positions, but there is not nearly enough liquidity in the system. The lack of liquidity shockwave is rampaging across all markets, sending stocks plunging in a liquidation panic, bonds crashing, yields up 50 basis points in 2 days, and a flight to safety in FX. Yen soaring, but at some point the inflection point will get hit and there will be an acute shortage of dollars as the global synthetic dollar short at around $6 trillion is even bigger than the basis trade. And finally, we have critical liquidity drainage events as soon as tomorrow. The 10-year auction followed by the 30-year auction on Thursday. And if there is not enough liquidity in the system, we may have an unofficially failed auction. Yes, dealers would in theory take down the whole thing, but if we get a 40 or 50% dealer award, it's the same as a failed auction. In other words, not enough people stepping up to buy treasuries because everyone's trying to dump them. Meanwhile, if this were happening at any other time, the Fed would be rushing to bail out the system. After all, Powell cut a jumbo 50 basis points in September of 2024 when there was zero stress in the market plumbing. But he can't do anything now because he would be seen as aiding Trump, especially since the narrative now is that yields are surging because of stagflation fears. And interestingly, he dropped 50 basis points in September when there was no stress in the market plumbing. Interesting. Almost like Powell may have an inkling of what's coming. Especially since the narrative now is that yields are surging because of stagflation fears, only that's not the case at all. Indeed, yields were tumbling until Friday when the basis trade started to get unwound, at which point they shot straight up. And the biggest paradox is that the more liquidity is drained, the higher yields will rise, the more the Fed will misinterpret the signal sent from yields as one of stagflation. quote, let Trump fix that. He just needs to undo tariffs, instead of what it really is, imploding liquidity and an imminent market crisis. Powell has spent the last several years telling the Treasury they need to get their shit together. He's basically saying, you guys are pumping way too much into the market and all of this is turning into bad debt and there's nothing I can do about that. You guys have to solve that problem. Well, now the conglomeration of actions taken by the Fed in the lead up to this and now the Trump administration is that it's flushing a bunch of this bad debt out. Because ultimately the goal is to try to bring down the 10-year so they can term out the debt, this $9 trillion in debt that's coming due this year. But they need to they have to do a lot of things before they get to that point. They need to flush out a bunch of this bad debt. And I suspect everyone's saying, oh, QE is coming, QE is coming. I do think that there is quote unquote QE coming. I think they're going to at some point they're going to need to inject funds into the market, but it can't be along the same existing plumbing that already exists, because it's just going to exacerbate all the problems. We don't need trillions of dollars going into basis trades for hedge funds. We need trillions of dollars going into building manufacturing and reindustrializing and building out infrastructure. So that new plumbing has to be built before all of that funding can be redirected into it. And I think they're also trying to get this reconciliation bill passed. Now there's an interesting thing here, because they're seeing, everyone was crowing about how Bessent said he wanted to get yields down, and now everything they're doing is making the yields go up. They have no idea what they're doing. And this guy here, Seth Levy, has had some very interesting thoughts on this. He says, I'm researching to better understand the yield spread in context of the Bessent short. What has been Bessent's clearly stated goal long term? Lowering the yield on the 10-year Treasury bond. But it's going up. Doesn't that mean he's failing? No. And he has a grok conversation here. He said, let's start with that I'm not proposing that I'm some sort of long-term expert in these issues. I'm not. But given the moment we're in, I've been giving this a lot of thought and doing a lot of research. With that said, let's explore. How does forcing the yuan over its psychological barrier connect with Bessent's goal of lowering yields? Well, in order to truly drive down the yield on the 10-year Treasury, you need a large and persistent demand for U.S. Treasuries. The type of demand that would result from a flight of capital out of China and into the U.S. Effectively, there needs to be a widespread universal agreement that China has failed to truly challenge the U.S. economically and is now falling back. This could include the idea that other countries like Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, and Australia are able and ready to take up some of the slack of a shrinking China. Remember, now they're going to be negotiating. They're not going to have these big global trade agreements anymore. Now they've forced all of these countries to get in line. They've got something like 75 countries now that have said they're going to get in line, and we're going to negotiate one-off trade agreements with each of you. And I suspect a major portion of those trade agreements is going to be these countries agreeing to hold more to buy and hold more U.S. treasuries. And if they coordinate this right, then you get China withdrawing, these other countries stepping up, who are countries that are theoretically more aligned in a certain sense, and they come in and they buy treasuries, which pushes yields down. I think this is kind of oversimplified. There's lots of different moving parts, but this is kind of a 50,000-foot view. Along the way to this Bessent short, however, the U.S. hedge funds derivative trade is blowing up. This trade has been a known systemic risk for a long time because it includes leveraging well over 10x to execute profitably. And yeah, well over 10x. There's 20x, 50x, 100x. All of these are things that people have thrown out and talking about it. Its existence and the volume of treasuries caught up in the trade makes it a barrier to lowering the yield. So this is from Grok. Yes, if the hedge funds had not been prodded into selling their basis trade positions, the trade's massive scale and leverage would likely have acted as a long-term constraint on lowering the 10-year treasury yield. So once again, this basis trade existing and these hedge funds sitting on it and being leveraged to the tits on this trade means that it was artificially holding yields high. The ongoing short positions in the cash treasury market would have suppressed treasury prices, keeping yields higher by an estimated 15 to 20 basis points or more, depending on leverage and market conditions. This effect would have counteracted safe haven demand for treasuries during the downturn and potentially complicated the Fed's efforts to lower yields through monetary policy. So the speculation here is that this basis trade existing was artificially holding yields high, up to 15 to 20 basis points. And that's when you're talking about the federal government reissuing debt. 15 to 20 extra basis points makes a pretty big difference. You're talking billions in interest expense from that. So having that buffer wedged in there, which everyone's been talking for a long time about how this is a major issue. This is a problem. I wasn't paying attention to this. It wasn't on my radar before, but once I started learning about it, I went back and found back for years, people have been saying, yeah, when things are good, it works out and it's a profitable trade and it's not that big of a deal. But if things start to go sideways, this is going to blow up and unwind in a hurry. And people are going to lose their asses. Continuing with the thread. So along the path of lowering the long-term yield, there are multiple steps. Break China in terms of the world's opinion of its dominance and unwind the massive basis trade that so many of the largest U.S. hedge funds are caught up in. Again, these are matters that Bessent knows way better than I do. What's happening in the market right now is extremely unusual. Typically, when equities collapse, there's a flight to safety. This means effectively people buy bonds to protect their money because bonds aren't supposed to be volatile. That's like the whole point. They're supposed to be the curves are supposed to be a lot smoother. But now we've got bond volatility, which means everyone's hair is on fire. That buying drives down the yield. But because of the unwinding of the basis trade, the yields are going up, not down, as the stock market is in clear bear territory after a precipitous decline. That isn't helpful to China, who can normally count on selling their U.S. treasuries into a high-demand market in order to prop up their economy. But in a moment of worldwide pressure, that expected treasury strength isn't there. The price of treasuries is low. We're then left to see what breaks first, U.S. hedge funds or the PBOC. Now, normally the Fed would step in and buy treasuries, or QE, which would normalize the market and provide liquidity. But for whatever reason, so far they aren't, and Team Trump isn't asking them to. For whatever reason, Trump, Bessent, and Powell seem completely comfortable letting things break. And it's important to realize that this is effectively a massive stress test that Trump created out of nothing and could lift at any moment. This is all being done intentionally. Now, it could be argued that these are all unintended consequences, that Trump and Bessent were unaware of the existence of the basis trade and its systemic risk. But given that it was a well-publicized reality and given its correlation to a primary Bessent goal of lowering the treasury yield, I seriously doubt they didn't know this could happen. So the primary thing I'll be looking for today is how Bessent, Trump, and Powell message around the yield spike. That will give insight into the perspective on all this. And interestingly, again, this was from yesterday. Interestingly, I haven't seen any of them really talking about it. Bessent came out and talked about other stuff. He talked about stablecoins. That was interesting. But they've said that the goal is to get the 10-year down. And all of this is happening, and the 10-year is spiking, and they're not really talking about it. There is a link here to the Grok conversation that goes into more detail on this. That will be included. If you want to go read more of the actual mechanics of it, then the one he's drawing on where Grok says, yeah, given these constraints, this basis trade was likely artificially inflating the yields. So go to the King Pilled Substack afterwards when I post this episode if you want to go read through all the details of that. Now I've got just some other pretty good commentary on this. I don't agree necessarily with all the details of all of them, but there are some people who are getting this. So this guy's at TMT Long Short. He says, I'll spell it out explicitly one last time. Everyone thinks Trump wants balanced trade. He does not. He wants to force allies to stop trading with China completely. Zero inbound supply. Because it's not just because of American jobs, it's a proactive move to slow down China's industrial rise. Everything is downstream of this. Reserve currency status, the ability to address fiscal debt. It's a crazy risk because China has a vote. It's a crazy risk because you are forcing Europe to commit seppuku because they have very little leverage or say in the matter. Isn't that an interesting observation? It's a crazy risk because Xi might bomb the fabs in Taiwan and the world doesn't get AGI. It's a crazy risk because China knows how financialized we are and will dump bonds and equities to drive anger toward Trump, but it also has benefits if it works. And I think a lot of these here, I think he's operating from not quite the right frame here, where he's really buying into this, the Trump-China trade war as being the primary motivator of all of this. But like, Xi is not going to bomb fabs in Taiwan. And ultimately, this is, I don't think the goal is, I do think Trump wants something like balanced trade. Really, he wants trade that favors America. Whether it's balanced or not is up to how other parties want to negotiate. But I think part of unwinding this whole the current state of the dollar reserve currency as it's been constructed with the relationship between the U.S. and China, that has to be broken up. And you can't just, if you treat this as just a thing between the U.S. and China, well, China still would have an incentive if they want to maintain their leverage on it. If the U.S. is going to maintain it or leave the door open for it, then they could do what they've been doing, which is essentially outsource some of their trade to other neighboring countries. So you want those other countries to also apply tariffs on China to break down that possibility. If your allies can't trade with China, there's no near-peer competitor to worry about. That has a ton of benefits. Just look what happened after World War II and the USSR collapsed when America was the last man standing. Hegemony. Trump's advisors like Mirren believe you can coerce your allies to pay for your security umbrella in the form of buying longer-dated treasuries. This removes the overhangs of the debt load while allowing you to pump markets in time for midterms. If Mexico can't import from China, then you solve the fentanyl crisis because they won't have precursors. More importantly, by establishing a tolerance for risk, the level of fear you can instill in cartels is an order of magnitude higher. Shit, if they risk World War III, they won't think twice about droning Sinaloa. This same logic applies to the Middle East. Now, I will repeat for the 100th time, this is not advocacy. I'm only telling you guys what people in power believe, and I'm telling you what happens next, if I'm right, will come down to how Xi wants to fight. He can go gloves off or gloves on. There are real constraints, as I've outlined in prior tweets, but there is a plan, and therefore the tolerance for market pain is way, way higher than you think. Because first, you need Europe to be willing to commit economic seppuku, and they won't want to, rightly. So Trump will crush them economically until they cry uncle. And then they still won't want to, and he's going to threaten to defang NATO. And then they still won't want to, and he will withdraw swap lines. Or a lot more likely, he will do it all very forcefully and all at once to maximize leverage. Now, you'll rightly ask, why wasn't this message better? Why have midwits like Lutnick on the team? Because you're attempting to execute a reckless gambit where the big variables are not what the tariff rates are, or if you tariff penguins, or if the person sounds dumb on TV. None of that matters. What matters is, will Japan capitulate quickly and agree to buy a large amount of treasuries? Will Saudi capitulate quickly with your B-2 bombers waiting in Diego Garcia to bomb Iran? Will China invade Taiwan? Many of you think everyone around Trump is retarded. I get it. You hate the guy and everything he stands for. But I will say this until I'm blue in the face. Besant and even Mirren have higher IQs than most, if not all of you. They thought through the second order effects. Believe me, if I, a dumb TMTLS bro, thought this far ahead, they certainly did too. Which means they warned Trump how risky this was and how deeply irrational it is if he planned to eventually cut a deal with China. Therefore, you have to assume Trump heard the risks and said, fuck it, we ball anyways. Economic blitzkrieg. That's what we're seeing, and it's only the start. And then, elaborating from the same guy, he says, Trump's tolerance for market pain is a lot higher than you think, because there is a plan. It might not be a good plan, but it is a complex plan that anticipated a crash. Not because they want a crash, but because they're dumb enough to think equities down. Not because they are dumb enough to think equities down 50% is good for the yield curve. Because the only way to coerce a full global decoupling from China is to play max hardball and move quickly. Because the first counterattack was always going to be financial. Because China correctly understands the West is over-financialized, and most people in Washington know China thinks that because Xi has been saying it loudly and proudly for years. So sequencing matters. Besant is being rushed to Japan and likely Saudi next to attempt to stabilize the yield curve. That's priority number one. Priority number two, game theory. Ensure you provide sufficient incentive for the first big pieces to flip your way. Coerce Japan to agree to put up massive tariffs, not just on China imports, but also on imports from countries who in turn trade with China. Establish a pattern for network effects where if you're left out of the new sphere, you lose out, not just on trade with the US, but also on trade with the early adopters of the new accords. This is very important. Again, they're now negotiating a whole bunch of one-off trade deals with individual countries that show up to have this out. Everyone's at the negotiation line now, please. And the earlier you get there, the better the deal is that you're going to get. Again, economic coercion alone will be insufficient to cause the desired cascade, which is why Rubio and Hegseth will be heavily involved and why starting with Japan makes sense. Japan is terrified of what a China-led sphere would entail. Again, not saying it's a good plan, but more pain has been anticipated and has been embraced. Economic blitzkrieg. Position accordingly. So this was what Bessent came out and said after the announcement from Trump that he was putting a 90-day pause on the majority of the countries so that they could come out and negotiate.
Good, thank you. And we saw the successful negotiating strategy that President Trump implemented a week ago today. It has brought more than 75 countries forward to negotiate. It took great courage for him to stay the course until this moment. And what we have ended up with here, as I told everyone a week ago, they're in this very spot, do not retaliate and you will be rewarded. So every country in the world who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you. We're going to go down to a 10% baseline tariff for them, and China will be raised to 125 due to their insistence on escalation.
So notice, this is not eliminating the tariffs. What everyone has now agreed to, and everyone begged for, and everyone was so grateful when it showed up, was falling back, was capitulating to a standard 10% tariff on everyone. Imagine a week ago if someone would have told you the entire world is going to beg for Trump to put a 10% tariff on everyone and then negotiate individually. You're like, it's never going to happen. And you want me to believe that he's the one who capitulated? He got to exactly the position he wanted to. Ryan Isaac says, Bessent is a stone-cold financial guy, knows how to navigate a political landmine. I'm telling you guys, I've been saying this for so long now. Bessent is an operator. He is the most important person in the administration, not named Trump or Vance. He is exactly where he wants to be. This is his dream position. Go listen to him talk about the Bretton Woods 2.0. He says, I want to be a part of that. He's exactly where he wants to be. And this is some more comments from him.
As I said, we've given 90 days, and the only certainty we can provide is that the U.S. is going to negotiate in good faith, and we assume that our allies will too. And in terms of certainty, we will see what China does. But what I am certain of is that what China is doing will affect their economy much more than it will ours, because they have an export-driven, flood the world with cheap export models, and the rest of the world now understands, because when we put up our tariff wall, those exports were already flowing to the rest of the G7 and to the global south.
And you think Mr. Secretary, how much of this decision was driven by the bond market cratering overnight? What is happening with bonds? Is China selling their bonds?
I have nothing that says that, and we actually had quite a good 10-year auction today, and all this was, again, this was driven by the president's strategy. He and I had a long talk on Sunday, and this was his strategy all along, and that, you might even say that he'd go to China into a bad position. They responded. They have shown themselves to the world to be the bad actors, and we are willing to cooperate with our allies and with our trading partners who did not retaliate. It wasn't a hard message. don't retaliate, things will turn out well.
It wasn't a hard message. Don't retaliate. Things will turn out well. Just don't retaliate. And what's funny is you could see it on the on the screen. You can see the Dow over here. You can see right here all of a sudden, because as soon as he announced that pause, you had the massive cratering, and then he announces the pause, and it goes. Vroom! So the other thing that this has done has discredited the idea of the stock market. And in a lot of people's minds, the stock market is something to be taken even less seriously. I can't remember if I said this on the show or if it was in the King Peel Discord the other day, but I think what's going to happen over the next several years is the conceptual space that meme coins hold in people's minds and the conceptual space the stock market holds are going to move together. Right now, the meme coins are kind of like, oh, it's kind of like gambling, and you could lose your ass, and things could spike or things could go down, and a single tweet can shift markets drastically. Well, that's what's happening with the stock market now. Historically, the stock market is like, oh, it's the thing that always goes up, and it's the safest investment. You just put all your retirement in the stock market, and it's always going to go up infinitely forever, and we can just retire on the stock market, which is completely insane. The stock market should be seen the way that meme coins are. Meme coins get a bad rap. The stock market gets too good of a rap, and both of those are going to move together. Here's another comment. Now, this is one of the single most important comments that has come out of all of this. Again, from our newly christened Gigafag.
For too long, financial policy has served large financial institutions at the expense of smaller ones. No more.
For too long, financial policy has served large financial institutions at the expense of smaller ones. No more. This whole basis trade, who was blowing up when this basis trade was unwinding? Large financial institutions, hedge funds, big institutional investors. They're the ones who were sucking up all that excess liquidity that was being pumped into the market throughout the Biden administration. They sucked it all up and put it in this hyper leveraged trade that was causing this manipulative effect on the thing that like the rest of the financial system is built off of, the 10-year. So what he's saying here is, you guys, he's at the American Bankers Association, and he's going up in front of them directly and saying, you guys just lost your asses, and it's just beginning. You need to get back in line. No more are you going to get to parasitize on the economy at the expense of the rest of the country.
No more. This administration aims to give all banks the chance to succeed, whether it's JP Morgan or your local mortgage and loan. It aims to get capital to Americans who need it by getting bureaucracy out of the way. For the last 4 decades, basically since I began my career in Wall Street has grown wealthier than ever before, and it can continue to grow and do well. But for the next 4 years, the Trump agenda is focused on Main Street. It's Main Street's turn. It's Main Street's turn to hire workers. It's Main Street's turn to drive investment. And it's Main Street's turn to restore the American dream.
Translation: we are decentralizing banking. We are decentralizing the banking economy within the United States. So this is a very interesting account here, Endgame Macro. I just started following him, and this account cranks out. Let me just give you an idea here. Look at the tweets, the timing of these, 3 hours ago, 4 hours ago, also 4 hours ago, also 4 hours ago, 5 hours ago. You get the idea. There, I smell the Grok accent in the writing here, but it's I'm pretty sure this is AI. It may be a person who is using AI and then going through and making some edits, because there's occasional grammatical errors and stuff. But and then some of the replies sound like it's a person, but I think that this is an AI account. It's very interesting to watch. I've started to see a number of these lately that I'm kind of suspecting this, and I'm getting the sense that there's an intentional propaganda effort being undertaken. But some of the stuff that these AI accounts are saying is pretty good. So this one here, responding to that Bessent tweet, he says, Scott Bessent's statement is far more than political rhetoric. It's a strategic economic signal aimed at reframing the U.S. financial paradigm under a second Trump administration. In the context of collapsing confidence in sovereign debt, a broken treasury market, rising populist anger, and a widening wealth gap between Wall Street and Main Street, Bessent is positioning the Trump platform as a post-neoliberal credit reallocation regime. He's implicitly endorsing a pivot away from the Fed's Wall Street-facing liquidity model, QE and asset inflation, toward directed capital flows, re-onshoring, and localized credit expansion. By stating it's Main Street's turn, Bessent is telegraphing that the next liquidity cycle won't enrich JP Morgan and BlackRock. It will fund small business, local banks, and productive labor. There is going to be a liquidity cycle, but they're signaling this is what we are setting up the payment rails, or the plumbing. We're establishing the plumbing to ensure that when we engage in liquidity promoting behavior, we don't want it just getting sucked up into basis trades. We don't want it getting sucked up into this hyper-financialized, globally internetworked economy. We want that liquidity to go where it should go. Strategically, he's also trying to preempt criticism of upcoming capital controls, tariffs, or selective liquidity programs by cloaking them in pro-America populism. Yes, this is what's coming. Capital controls, tariffs, and selective liquidity programs. This narrative justifies potential deglobalization policies, aggressive tariff escalation, and de-dollarization defenses as tools of economic justice rather than financial warfare. With the sovereign bond market faltering and the traditional monetary transmission channels clogged, the only political viable path left is Main Street monetarism, targeted stimulus, tax breaks, credit easing for local institutions, and maybe even domestic QE for the people. It's a prelude to the political phase of the sovereign debt crisis, where monetary credibility is being sacrificed for domestic stability. Once again, monetary credibility is being sacrificed for domestic stability. Bessent is laying the narrative rails now, so when liquidity returns, the Fed doesn't funnel it back into Wall Street, but into the heartland. And I've got a couple more things before I get to the next major thing I want to talk about here, but there's a bit of a signal if you read it in here. Sacrificing monetary credibility for domestic stability. Think about what the entire premise of the U.S. economy has been based on for the last 50 plus years. The US dollar being the global reserve currency, and the entire world is looped it. Like when something bad happens to the US dollar, it ripples out into everybody else, because every single other institution in the world is ultimately grounded in the US dollar. So if the US government is willing to sacrifice monetary credibility for the sake of domestic stability, that requires some sort of alternative, some sort of deus ex machina of sorts, something that completely redefines the paradigm to allow them, to give them the latitude to be able to sacrifice some monetary credibility to ensure domestic stability. More on that in just a moment. Here's another tweet talking about, from the same account, talking about, let's see here. Okay, well, I'll just share it. So Luke Groman has a comment here, and I'm more interested in the replies here from in-game macro, and I've still got to keep us going quick. He says, what nobody's talking about is how Treasury and Fed policy may be intentionally leaning into this unwind. By keeping front-end rates elevated and delaying balance sheet tools, they're indirectly squeezing these leverage players to steepen the curve and reprice long-end risk. It's kind of a complicated way of saying they're what I've been saying. They're doing this on purpose. Everyone's like, oh no, everything's blowing up. They're not coming in to save it. They're making everything worse and worse and worse. And he's saying they're doing this on purpose. It's a backdoor form of yield curve control through volatility. The forced unwind isn't just a bug. It might be the feature to buy time for rollover windows while masking it as market-driven adjustment. Feels like engineered fragility, not just failed hedging. So it's not just that the administration was like, oh no, we didn't realize things were as like teetering on the brink as they are. So we're oh no, everything's starting to break up, and we got to try to react to it and try to save our asses. No, he's saying this has been engineered this way. Guy asks, what in all of the Fed and Trump's action makes you think they're capable of planning and executing such a crazy Ivan? I know we like to find order in chaos, but sometimes the system just goes clunk. The other thing about the engineered fragility here is that the things like that basis trade, it is engineering fragility into the system, which longtime followers of Stormy Waters and Tom Luongo and some of the others who've been talking about the euro dollar and the institution of the imposition of the euro dollar and the way that it's been used to kind of hold America by the balls and drag us around. The fragility is a feature, not a bug, because it prevents American policymakers and American leaders from doing some of the things necessary to extricate America from this suicide pact. Because if you start trying to move things, everything blows up really quick. And when everything blows up really quick, everyone freaks out and says, what are you doing? How could you move things and blow everything up? So it requires someone who has the political will to step in and be willing to take those PR hits on the chin because they have a plan that they're mapping out for the long term. So his response to this crazy Ivan question, he says, they don't need to plan a crazy Ivan in full detail for it to play out that way. It's not about omnipotent foresight. It's about incentives, constraints, and plausible deniability. If the Fed and Treasury know rollover walls are approaching, foreign buyers are stepping back, and QT is pressuring liquidity, then delaying relief while front-end rates remain penned creates a natural clearing mechanism. Flush the leverage, reprice long duration, widen the curve, and earn more room for later intervention. Think of it less as chess and more like judo, redirecting market fragility into a policy advantage while maintaining the illusion of market forces. Whether it's by design or convenient chaos, the outcome is the same. Engineered steepening under the guise of disorder. So, what are the points here? Flush the leverage. So all this leverage that's causing this really brittle system that's baking in and creating the inertia that forces this hollowing out effect that's hitting America on one hand and China on the other hand in different ways. But all the hyper leverage, all the rehypothecation in the offshore dollar market, and then all the excess liquidity pumped in throughout the Biden administration that's going straight into Wall Street to fund these ever more complex financialization schemes, that leverage has to be flushed out to create the space to do the global realignment, the Bretton Woods 2.0. Then they need to reprice the long duration. So they need to stabilize the bond prices and get the long duration debt back in alignment with respect to the short duration debt. Because if the debt is priced such that holding short-term debt pays you more than holding long-term debt, then when the yield curve inverts, I think I said that backwards. When the yield curve inverts, where you're being incentivized to purchase the short-term debt at the expense of the long-term debt, this is a bad sign for stability in the market. It constrains people's ability to plan and to forecast and to start building long-term plans. So they need to uninvert the yield curve and get the proper slope back in so that people are pricing things in accordance with an optimistic view of the future. So they need to reprice the long duration, widen the curve, and then earn more room for later intervention. And before I get to the Deus Ex Machina sort of thing, let me read this tweet here. This is another good one that also sounds like AI to me. This is from Shay Bolur, Stock Savvy Shay. All in on the fourth industrial revolution. My theory on what's really happening The United States tripled its money supply over the past 2 decades. That's not some abstract economic trivia. That's the foundational distortion that shaped every asset class, every risk model, and every portfolio built since the great financial crisis. We spent nearly a decade pretending the cost of capital didn't matter, that money could be free and the consequences deferred. The results? Mortgage rates below inflation, a stock market priced for perfection, and a generation of investors who came to believe gravity no longer applied. Now we're just waking up from the dream, and people are treating the hangover like it's some unexpected injustice. As if 3% mortgage rates were a natural right. As if the Qs only ever goes up. But this isn't some rogue detour. This is the return to reality, and reality hurts. But here's where it gets more complex and more dangerous. Because what we're seeing isn't just the result of delayed normalization. It's not just the unwinding of pandemic stimulus or rate repression. There's something else layered beneath the surface, and the signs aren't subtle. This isn't a policy drift, it's a campaign. A strategic, targeted repositioning of America's role in the global economy. And if you look at the moves, tariffs, trade threats, the rhetoric around reshoring, and the calculated pressure on allies, the target becomes clear. It's not inflation, it's not even the bond market, it's China. Now I say it is, like, you can't disentangle these things. I think the tweet is good otherwise, but you can't really disentangle these things. You don't have to believe in conspiracy to see the through line. Over the last couple of years, the tone in Washington has shifted from cooperation to confrontation. Even the doves have turned hawkish. And for the first time in decades, the U.S. is structuring trade and capital policy not around growth, but around leverage. Around weaponizing our position as the global buyer of last resort. And let's be honest, we are the demand engine. We are the end market. China might rival us in GDP, but their economy is still built on exports, not internal demand. Their strength relies on moving goods out, not pulling capital in. And that makes them vulnerable. Because if you want to break an export economy, you don't just go after their goods directly, you go after everyone. You raise tariffs across the board. You force the world to choose, us or them. You don't get both. And that's exactly what's happening. This isn't scattershot anymore. It's a campaign of forced alignment. Vietnam, Mexico, Europe, they're all feeling the pressure. Even Israel and Lesotho aren't spared. Why? Because the point isn't fairness. The point is forcing a break. If the entire global system orients around the U.S. consumer, then tariffs become a blunt, brutal way of redrawing the map. You want access to our markets? Play by new rules. Choose your team. And if that's the game being played, not economic stewardship, but geopolitical realignment, then no amount of earnings beats are going to stabilize markets. Because the market doesn't just price data, it prices direction. And right now, direction is unclear. Volatility isn't a function of fear, it's a function of uncertainty. And uncertainty is policy. In other words, they're intentionally making things uncertain. Which is why I'm not being aggressive about buying this dip. It's not that I'm bearish on innovation. The fourth industrial revolution is just getting started with names like Palantir, a bunch of these, Amazon, Tesla, a bunch of these technology companies. It's not that I doubt the long-term strength of U.S. enterprise. It's that I don't know the rules anymore, and neither does the market. Capital doesn't rush into ambiguity. It pulls back. It reassesses. It maintains optionality. And that's what's happening. Under the surface of every investment and every earnings reaction is the same question. Can I even model what comes next? The truth is, until China blinks or Trump backs down, this is going to be the backdrop. Not because the market is broken, but because it's working. It's doing its job. Pricing the regime, not just the risk. And if there's no clarity, there's no bid. We saw what happened on a rumor. Markets ripped 8% in a single day. That's how starved this market is for any sign of policy coherence. A real deal with China? The tape wouldn't just rally, it would melt faces. We don't have that headline. We have noise. We have the sense that something big is happening, but no confirmation of what it is or where it leads. And that's not a market you trade, that's a market you survive. I don't say that with cynicism, I say it with clarity. Because what we're witnessing right now isn't a cycle. It's a regime shift. One that views the economic playbook as outdated. One that sees disruption not as risk, but as leverage. So no, this isn't the detox we were promised. It's not a thoughtful recalibration of America's industrial base. It's not an orderly unwind of global imbalance. It's a controlled demolition with no architectural plan for what gets built next. And here's where I diverge from him. Yes, I do believe that it isn't the detox we were promised. and it's not a thoughtful recalibration of America's industrial base, though it is those things in a sense. There is no orderly unwind of global imbalance because you can't have an orderly unwind of global imbalance. It is a controlled demolition because that's the only way you get a detox or a thoughtful recalibration. There is a clear architectural plan for what gets built next. We just haven't had all the details publicly revealed and aligned in exactly the way that a bunch of people want. He says, and markets, for all their flaws, know better than to bet on blueprints that haven't even been drawn. Now, part of the reason why they would be a little cagey about exactly what comes next is because if your goal is to stimulate a whole bunch of uncertainty so that you get people to withdraw, particularly withdraw into cash, and prepare themselves to move, if you want people to do that, then you intentionally have to not give them certainty. You have to give them some directionality. Things are going to go this way. What comes next is going to favor Main Street. It's not going to favor Wall Street. But the exact details are yet to be released intentionally. So here's where I think things are going to get very, very interesting. Oops. Share this tab. This from April 9, yesterday. Sasha Hodder from the Hodlcast. She says, Van Eck confirms that China and Russia are settling energy trades in Bitcoin. De-dollarization is here. The U.S. should immediately end sanctions on Russia or it's game over for the USD. Digital assets, this is from Van Eck. It says, de-dollarization moves Bitcoin toward monetary role. The Trump administration's April 2 tariff package targeting imports from China and the EU has reignited global trade tensions and increased the risk of monetary and geopolitical fragmentation. Bitcoin initially dipped from 85K to the 81K range after the announcement and sold off further over the weekend, but has still outperformed the NASDAQ across every major time frame, 1 week, 1 month, year to date, and over the past 1, 2, 3, 5, and 10 years. While slower growth alone isn't bullish for Bitcoin, the policy response might be. If tariffs weigh on GDP without triggering a fresh inflation spike, the Fed may have scope to cut rates, reintroducing the liquidity conditions under which Bitcoin has historically excelled. At the same time, the weaponization of trade and financial infrastructure continues to drive interest in neutral settlement rails. That interest is no longer theoretical. China and Russia have reportedly begun settling some energy transactions in Bitcoin and other digital assets. Bolivia has announced plans to import electricity using crypto, and French energy utility EDF is exploring whether it can mine Bitcoin with surplus electricity currently exported to Germany. These are early signs that Bitcoin is evolving from a speculative asset into a functional monetary tool, particularly in economies looking to bypass the dollar and reduce exposure to US-led financial systems. Now, notice that Bessent, when he was talking to Tucker, he volunteered the information that Bitcoin is beginning to behave as a store of value. And the more history we have of Bitcoin establishing a track record, the more seriously people take it. I was watching CNBC the other day, and as part of their stock ticker, they have the price of Bitcoin. It's been completely normalized. And in all of these crazy spikes up and down and collapses and Bitcoin's just been chugging right along. It's starting to show signs of detaching a little bit from the NASDAQ. And it's remaining more stable than just about anything else, relatively speaking. It's very obvious that Bessent is well aware of the potential of Bitcoin. And there's all sorts of Bitcoin bulls all around the administration. And if Van Eck is reporting that China and Russia are beginning to settle energy trades in Bitcoin, and both Xi and Putin have come out and said very complimentary things about Bitcoin over the last few months, then obviously it behooves the United States to get ahead of this game. They've already talked about the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. They've got the AI and crypto czar. They've already signaled that they're very, very bullish on Bitcoin. And yesterday, when Bessent came out, the first thing he talked about was not the 10-year. The first thing he talked about was stable coins. So we were talking about this in the King Pill Discord yesterday. We were talking about how what's most likely coming is the issuance of Bitcoin bonds. So instead of doing a treasury issuance, or maybe alongside doing treasury issuances, they're going to start doing Bitcoin bonds. A little bit more about that here in just a minute. I've got one more tweet from this this kind of weird AI-like account talking about this. He's replying to someone talking about the potential liquidity coming. He said, if current trends continue, we're likely 12 to 18 months away from the full onset of the largest global easing cycle in modern financial history, and we may already be in the early stages of it. The seeds are being sown by a toxic convergence: weakening global demand, rising sovereign debt servicing costs, trade war escalation, and rapidly deteriorating treasury auctions, evidenced by tail size and poor bid to covers. Central banks, particularly the Fed, are boxed in by structurally high deficits and a politically untenable cost of capital. As growth slows under the weight of tariffs and tighter credit and inflation begins to cool, the pivot window opens fast. What's different this time is the magnitude and coordination of what will be required. The U.S. is headed toward quasi-fiscal dominance, with interest payments exceeding defense spending and foreign buyers retreating from U.S. treasuries. Quasi-fiscal dominance versus monetary dominance. So the Treasury driving the Fed versus the Fed driving the Treasury. Europe is seeing fiscal expansion amid slowing exports, and Japan is quietly managing yield curve control. Emerging markets already strained will be forced to follow suit or devalue. We're likely to see synchronized rate cuts, fiscal stimulus, and balance sheet expansion across major economies, not out of choice, but as an act of global financial survival. The softening in oil prices, collapsing sentiment, and instability in rate markets are flashing early warning signs of this break. The most revealing signal isn't CPI, it's liquidity mechanics. Worsening bond market internals, widening tails in auctions, the divergence between equity rallies and bond stress, and a creeping bid for gold as a base asset. Central banks are watching these fragilities very closely. Once volatility forces a credit event or the labor market decisively cracks, intervention will be immediate, overwhelming, and historic in scale. This will be a whatever it takes moment, not to stimulate growth, but to prevent a cascade. If correct, we'll look back on 2025 and 2026 as the beginning of the post-Volcker era, where central banks drop the pretense of independence and easing becomes permanent policy cover for a fundamentally insolvent sovereign framework. Rates may not go deeply negative in nominal terms in the US, but real rates will be engineered deeply negative for years, possibly a decade, in a strategy of stealth default. Basically, this is the fiat currencies are collapsing. So we're going to continue to have things like that'll have the name of the dollar or the ruble or the yen or whatever, but they're going to be recollateralized. But it's going to have to be in sort of a stealthy way because there is so much. The orthodoxy is so built around modern monetary theory and and fiat currency and all that sort of thing. But we're seeing the death of the fiat model, which it was going to happen eventually. The next easing cycle won't be a pause between hikes. It will mark the formal end of sound money in the developed world. I would say that this is like sound fiat currency, not sound money per se. And this guy replies, says, liquidity incoming, so bullish on Bitcoin and stocks. And he says, not financial advice, but this kind of liquidity isn't bullish in the usual sense. It's defensive liquidity. The system's buckling under collateral stress, swap spreads are blowing out, and stealth backstops are being set up to keep the treasury market functioning. That's not the type of liquidity that pushes Bitcoin and stocks higher sustainably. It's the type that signals something just broke. Risk assets might catch a reflex bid after the chaos, but we're still in the stress phase, not the melt up phase. I do believe that Bitcoin being seen as a risk asset is what he's saying is not necessarily wrong, but it also is not necessarily applicable to Bitcoin fully, because we're moving into an age where I'd say over the next 12 to 18 months, it's become very clear that a lot of sentiment is going to turn toward Bitcoin, and it's not just going to be seen as, a tech stock proxy or something like that. And this guy says, is it possible they believe in a very crack-handed way that this will somehow force cryptocurrency into becoming a default solution? They seem so heavily invested, and the evidence also points to a group of people so caught up in themselves and their beliefs that they won't see any problem with that. And Endgame Macro says, crypto is becoming a relief valve because it offers a parallel set of financial rails that bypass the clogged and dysfunctional parts of the traditional system, namely the treasury market and bank plumbing. As swap spreads blow out, foreign demand for long-duration treasuries vanishes, and primary dealer capacity hits its limits. Policymakers are scrambling for mechanisms that allow capital to flow without relying on strained legacy institutions. Enter tokenized treasuries and stablecoins. By putting short-dated U.S. debt directly on chain and letting anyone globally access it 24/7 without regulatory capital constraints, the US can extend dollar demand and inject liquidity through a decentralized distribution model, rather than through formal QE or banking channels that are politically and structurally constrained. The second reason crypto is critical is geopolitical. The US appears to be abandoning the voluntary treasury financing model, opting instead to coerce participation, e.g., foreign asset taxation, and reroute global demand through US regulated digital dollar instruments. This is what's being constructed as an alternative to the existing model, where the US is the largest market that is all a net importer and exports dollars that are then used to come back and buy treasuries. Like, that's been the foundation of the global monetary system. And that's being unwound and replaced with something like what he's describing here, where now you're going to be coerced to participate in this market because you want to get into the American market and it's paywalled. And we're going to paywall your market and constrain your ability to participate with ours until and unless you agree to play ball with us, which means buying into the new system we're constructing. He says this aligns with stablecoin legislation and tokenized treasury products built by Wall Street giants. Crypto rails enable a soft form of shadow QE by letting liquidity pool into risk assets and short duration instruments without triggering inflation optics or congressional backlash. So while crypto might not solve the crisis, it absorbs it, providing a market-based escape hatch for a system whose pipes are bursting. I really encourage you, if you didn't completely follow this, I can't go back and re-emphasize all this stuff because I got to get wrapped up here. But if you didn't completely follow this, I encourage you, go to the link in the King Pill Substack when I post this episode and come down and read this. It's the tweet that starts, "Crypto is becoming a relief valve." Come down here, read this again, think about it. Use Grok if you need to summarize it or explain it better for you. But he is really onto something. Whatever this is. And here is a suggestion from the Bitcoin Policy Institute, who have been in communication with the administration, talking about bit bonds. If you go search the channel for bit bonds, I've talked about these in the past. They say with over $14 trillion in U.S. federal debt maturing in the next 3 years, Bitcoin-enhanced bonds are an innovative fiscal tool to address multiple critical objectives. They've got a graphic here, and then there's a link down here to their policy paper that they wrote, Bitcoin-enhanced treasury bonds, an idea whose time has come. Now, it's a 60-minute read. It's a long one. So what I did is I just helpfully had Grok summarize it for us. It says the document proposes Bitcoin-enhanced U.S. Treasury bonds, BIT bonds, as a financial tool to address multiple U.S. fiscal and strategic goals, building on a March 6, 2025 executive order by President Trump that established Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset likened to digital gold. The proposal aims to tackle the U.S.'s $36 trillion national debt, refinance $14 trillion in maturing debt by 2028, and expand the strategic Bitcoin reserve without taxpayer costs. Key points of the BIT bonds program. 1, the structure. 90% of bond proceeds fund conventional government operations or debt refinancing, while 10% is used to buy Bitcoin, balancing stability with exposure to Bitcoin's growth potential. A $2 trillion issuance could allocate $200 billion to Bitcoin purchases. The objectives: reduce the federal debt burden by leveraging Bitcoin's historical growth to lower interest costs. BIT bonds could offer a 1% interest rate versus 4.5% for standard treasuries, potentially saving $70 billion annually in interest. It would expand the strategic Bitcoin reserve, potentially growing to $14 trillion by 2035 if Bitcoin appreciates at historical rates of 53% CAGR. And it would provide a tax-advantaged savings vehicle for households, with Bitcoin-linked returns capped at a threshold, 100% of gains up to a set annual return, 50% thereafter, with the rest retained by the government. So for households, like individual Americans who buy these, who allocate to these bonds, you get Bitcoin-linked returns. So you get 100% of the gains in Bitcoin up to a set annual return. Then you get 50% thereafter, and then the government retains the rest of it. The implementation, a 3-phase rollout, includes a $5 to $10 billion pilot, legislative codification for tax exemptions, and integration into Treasury's issuance calendar. Bonds would be held in secure multi-signature cold storage managed by a specialized treasury unit. And what this, like, if you think about what's happening with the bond market right now, the bond market is stressed the hell out, super volatility. Everyone's looking for something that's long-term stable, something that they can go into, they can invest their money into, that is not going to be all over the place and having to be monitored constantly, which is basically what a bond was. Well, a Bitcoin bond would be very stable long-term. This would be one of the best sorts of stable capital that the long-term investors, the big funds, the pensions, the hedge funds, the insurance markets, all of them could invest in something like this that would be much more stable. We're already seeing sort of a micro version of this happening with a strategy, formerly known as MicroStrategy, but the convertible bonds that they've been issuing. When you have this market that's thirsty for stable debt, a Bitcoin bond would being introduced now, there would actually be quite a bit of potential demand for it, especially once it starts mooning as it becomes more normalized. But in order to get the market to actually accept this and take it seriously, and to have the political cover to make a move like this, everyone has to be in a really desperate spot, which is, again, why you intentionally create all of the volatility and the uncertainty. Here's the benefits. It saves an estimated $354 billion in interest in present value, even if Bitcoin's price remains flat, with trillions in potential debt reduction if it grows. It attracts institutional and retail investors, projecting 80% institutional and 20% households, with 132 million households potentially investing $3,025 each on average. And it strengthens U.S. financial leadership by embracing digital assets, countering global competitors like China. The risks and the mitigation. Bitcoin's volatility is acknowledged, but diversified allocation and long-term holding minimize the risks. Regulatory clarity and secure custody ensure stability. And honestly, if Bitcoin's upwardly volatile, that's actually a huge bonus. That makes them even more valuable. The downward volatility is rough, but the upward volatility means it could be an absolute screaming deal. The proposal frames Bitbonds as a bold step to modernize U.S. fiscal policy, reduce debt, and position America as a Bitcoin superpower while offering citizens a secure, growth-oriented investment. So again, this was just a summary from Grok. The link, if you go to the Kingpilled Substack, if you want to read the whole thing, I would encourage you to go read it, go skim through it, or to look up the Bitcoin Policy Institute, some of the interviews and stuff they've done on YouTube where they talk about this. So I've got two last quick things to get through here, but there's some super chats I want to go back and cover. Appreciate you guys bearing with me as I kind of burn through all of this as fast as I can. CG Constantine. We've got 10, what do we call these? Brazilian reals. You got to give me guys some suggestions. We got leaf bucks. We got the rue bucks. We got the eagle bucks. What do we call the real? He says, hello, King Pillars. I say we will win, even though I don't know what we're talking about. Also, everyone's missing the point of the dire wolf. It was a marketing stunt. We now can mass produce animals. Yeah, I might talk about the dire wolf story here in the near future. If you don't know what he's talking about, just search for it. There was a Joe Rogan interview, and you can learn about the dire wolf. And then there's some more down here. Another two of them. He says two of these Brazilian bucks, BBL bucks. There you go. Yeah. BBL bucks. Here we go. He said super chat skipped. I did not skip it, sir. I'm sorry. It took me too long to get back to it. Phil says, can someone share this tweet thread? All the links I went through will all be on the Kingpilled Substack. Then again from Mr. CG Constantine. 5 more BBL bucks. He says, just an addition, when I say mass production of animals, pay attention to any talk about artificial wombs. Oh yeah. There's some there's some dark stuff that's going to come down the line. Okay, was there anything else here? Sorry that I can't keep up with all of the comments today, but I've already gone longer than I planned to. D-Reverent says, Bitcoin has layers of different types of investors. There's a layer of speculative tech stock type holders, which give Bitcoin a reputation of being volatile, but it's mostly gold style hodlers below. Yes, exactly. The stuff that causes the volatility is a lot of the surface level. There's a really hard floor under there that's not going anywhere because these people are religiously committed to hodling no matter what. And the volatility potential is actually not a bad thing. The downward volatility can be problematic, but once you get institutional investors, once it gets normalized and all the institutional investors start pouring into it, it's gonna moon. It's gonna go up high and fast, which is gonna normalize it even more quickly. And it's gonna happen right at the moment where everybody's looking for something that isn't blowing up all over the place. Phil says, if they're telling us this is what they plan on doing, it means they've already been doing it to some capacity. This confirms that Bitcoin has been used as collateral for repo transactions. Yes, I agree. And those repo transactions are what SOFR is based on, by the way. Also, Phil, I don't know if you've looked into this, but look at Tether. So you've got Tether relocating to El Salvador, Tether being one of the largest holders of treasuries. And the decision they made just recently, they were going to start minting the Tether coins on the Lightning Network. So Tether and Bitcoin are getting even more intertwined. They already were, because a lot of people, when they're trading in and out of Bitcoin, going from Bitcoin into other currencies, they'll often trade into Tether, and they'll just hold Tether before they convert over to dollars because it's a cheaper, quicker transaction. So there's already a strong correlation between Bitcoin and Tether, and it's going to be even more so. And then Tether being such a huge holder of treasuries means you've now got treasuries and Tether and Bitcoin all getting sort of blended together. And so as they begin to normalize stable coins and beginning to incorporate those more broadly, setting up all these different payment rails, if they start doing Bitcoin bonds, you're now merging treasuries, the dollar, Tether, and Bitcoin all in various different ways, but you're actually creating an extremely robust dollar where you could get this closed capital account where you have the domestic dollar that circulates domestically and it's maintained domestically while maintaining the global reserve currency status in effect, because you ensure that the primary stablecoin issuers are tied to the dollar. They're buying treasuries, and the stablecoin by definition is 1-to-1 with the dollar. And then all these other different nations, when they start settling up their different FX transactions and doing various different international transactions, if they're using stable coins to do this, then there's de facto demand for dollars and for treasuries because of that. So you can actually get the global reserve currency status while maintaining a domestic dollar and they move independently of each other. So you can maintain extra control over the domestic economy, not having it be so influenced by outside factors, while still getting the benefit of having the rest of the world financing your debt. Last two quick threads here. Brian Riley, founder and CEO of Guardian Bikes, building a massive, highly automated bicycle factory in the Midwest. A bicycle factory. Well, that's kind of an odd thing. You wouldn't think that would be a big deal. They're making a bicycle factory? Well, listen to this. He says, today we announced a $19 million financing with JP Morgan Chase to launch the first high-volume bicycle frame manufacturing plant in the U.S. But this isn't just about bikes or even just about manufacturing. It's about a new model for how physical products are built and delivered in the 21st century. Vertically integrated from raw material to doorstep. Powered by automation, data, and domestic supply chains. Designed for speed, resilience, and product market fit. Built in the Midwest, not offshore. The old model was efficient but brittle. We're building something different. A vertically integrated platform for consumer products that leverages U.S. manufacturing, robotics, and AI to go from idea to product to customer faster and better than ever before. This is what the future of making things looks like, and it's starting in Seymour, Indiana. Hoosiers, here you go. You can just do things. It's happening. And the emphasis, I like the emphasis here on, like, yeah, maybe bikes may be the thing that we're selling, but ultimately our business model is about this vertical integration contained entirely domestically, powered by automation, data, and domestic supply chains. This is the future. People are beginning to move into this to begin defining this market. Here's where our guys have such an opportunity. They can start to, and there's all sorts of different ways that they can export this business model. I don't mean export it overseas. I mean export it domestically. They're creating a like a conceptual infrastructure that will. There's so many different incentives that ripple out from around this as they begin establishing this basis for doing things. And you have all the different adjacent. You have financial institutions and shipping and all the secondary and tertiary microeconomies that connect to this that begin moving around this idea. Our whole economy's been built around this import economy, and it's going to take time to realign around the vertically integrated supply chains that are domestically contained, with then the ability to export on top of that. This is a major, major white pill. And of course, it's JP Morgan. $19 million financing with JP Morgan for this. Shout out to Uncle Jamie. And lastly, related to this, Devin Erickson. I don't have time to read the whole nested threads, but I just want to get this tweet here. He says, thinking about this further, every design and implementation loop involves alternating between planning and gathering feedback. Planning allows you to develop, feedback allows you to course correct. I believe that frequent course correction is more important than planning quality. For example, during the Korean War, the American F-86 Sabre was outclassed in every edge of the envelope performance spec by its counterpart, the Soviet Mikoyan Gurevich 15. And yet, in clashes between the two, the overall kill ratio heavily favored the Sabre. Why? Because air combat isn't a climb rate contest, it's about precision maneuvering. And the Sabre had superior control responsiveness due to its full set of hydraulically boosted control surfaces, which the MiG lacked. This gave it a shorter delay between pilot input and aircraft response. This meant that American pilots were essentially playing this high-stakes video game with a much higher frame rate and lower ping time, and they could make minor corrections with greater accuracy. In other words, a tighter feedback loop wins. I believe that this is a general principle which holds true across many fields. Plans are necessary, but they're always guesswork. It is better to improve a plan by frequent grounding to reality and course correcting than it is to spend lots of effort on any iteration of the plan. As Frederick Brooks put it, plan to throw one away. You will anyway. Just start building. Just start writing. Just start coding. It's okay if that means you make mistakes, because those mistakes are the whole point. The work product of early design iterations isn't a successful working program or machine or story or system. The goal of your early iterations is the knowledge you gain from your failures. You want to fail. Fail early, fail fast, and learn from the failures. I haven't ever had the privilege of working with John, the guy he's quote tweeting here, but I'd wager that he doesn't do a deep dive before starting to code. I'll bet he just starts coding, and the deep dives happen when those early efforts have given him a detailed understanding of the real shapes of the obstacles in his path. Go follow Devin Erickson. And remember, you can just do things. You must just do things. The time for doing things is now. Glonk Respector says on Sam Hyde's latest show, he said he thinks Bitcoin still has another 300x in it. Yeah, Michael Saylor's forecast for Bitcoin is $13 million. $13 million per Bitcoin by, I think it's either 2035 or 2045. It might be 2045. And that's, honestly, that's kind of a conservative case. It could be even more than that. Once you start seeing how those calculations are done to get to that point, it seems entirely plausible. It is still early. There were people who were at, $3,000. They were like, oh man, I first heard about Bitcoin when it was $5. I could have gotten in early, but now it's at 3,000. Oh well. Those 3,000, the people who got in at 3,000, they got in early. Now it's at 80. The people who get in at 80, you're getting in early. This is not investment advice. But the people who get in now are still getting in early. All right, guys. Do me a favor and hit the like button on the way out. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at RealKingPilled. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Go to the King Pilled Substack. Subscribe over there. There is a paid subscription option if you would like to support that way. Send some shekels your boy's way. There's also a Buy Me a Coffee link and a Cash App link in the description. And there is a Bitcoin. My Bitcoin address is on my Twitter account. So you see the little tip function. Bitcoin address is there, and I'm very happy for you to send me all the Bitcoin you would like. And a reminder that I will be dropping in with Mr. Jason Miranchuk over on Miranchuk Now to join him for a conversation tonight on Asmongold and AA. So make sure you come join us for that. Keep an eye on when he's about to go live. I think he's probably going to go live here in a half hour, an hour, somewhere in there. So I'll see you guys over there, and I will be back tomorrow with another episode of the Astrolabe. Make sure you go download the EWBSX app and start listening to EWBSX, the Cyberbully. And for now, I leave you with Hulk.
When they took a shot at my hero, and they tried to kill the next president of the United States, enough was enough.